Chapter 750. Jing Jiu didn't pay attention to him. The fire carp swam to the edge of the pond and stopped in his shadow, wagging its tail ingratiatingly. This made him think of Ada and softened his mood. He said to the fire carp, "I'm glad to see you living well here." Then he looked at the old Master Zhang and said with some surprise, "You've lived longer than I thought." The flow of time in the green sky mirror grew closer to that in the outside world. Many years had passed, but the eldest young Master Zhang was still alive. He said proudly, "Your Majesty's flood of good fortune is as great as the heavens. It's enough for you to bestow me with a trace of it." Jing Jiu confirmed that he was old and weak, but he could still live for a few more years. Without saying anything more, he asked the fire carp, "Do you want to go back?" The "go back" referred to Chao Tian. The fire carp was a little surprised. It pouted its round mouth and said with grievance, "I'm just a ghost now. How can I go back?" The eldest young Master Zhang was surprised to know that his friend could leave alive. He reprimanded him. Since His Majesty wants you to go back, he must have a solution. Thinking of the fact that Jing Jiu had sent his divine soul to the all-in-one sword to prolong his life, the fire carp couldn't help but ask curiously, "You want me to become a swordfish?" It was impossible to find another all-in-one sword in the world. Jing Jiu said, "Someone gave me a vermilion bird jade egg. He has always wanted to raise this jade egg, but in fact, it is hopeless." The blue bird flew down from the sky and landed on his shoulder. It asked, "You want to give it to this stupid fish?" The fire carp knew that she was the master of this world, but he couldn't control his emotions and shouted, "You are the stupid bird." If Zhuo Ruzhui was here, he would definitely say that all the mythological beasts in Zhongzhou school were like this. No wonder they were in such a miserable state. Jing Jiu said to the fire carp, "You and Vermilion Bird have similar attributes, so you should be able to revive." The fire carp asked, "Will I become a monster?" The old Master Zhang couldn't help but say, "You are a monster now." No. I don't want to become a birdfish or a fish bird." The fire carp shook its head repeatedly, creating splashes in the water. "Are you sure you want to stay here? You should know that this is not a long-term solution, and problems can easily arise," Jing Jiu said. The fire carp looked at the old Master Zhang, whose face was full of worry. It spat out a few bubbles from its round mouth, which burst as soon as it came out of the water. "I'm quite happy here, even though I'm just a strand of my divine soul. I don't care about what happens in the future. I'll think about it after this guy dies." Great-grandfather Zhang almost choked on his own saliva. He coughed twice and said, "I'll roast you and eat you before I die." He might even be able to live for a few more decades. Since that was the case, Jing Jiu would not care about this matter anymore. He did not want to listen to these two guys who were even more talkative than Zhuo Ruzhui and Lu Shui. He turned around and walked into the ancestral hall. The incense in the ancestral hall had already been burning for a long time, and the green smoke also lingered for a long time. It was unknown what he did, but he just left. "Is there anything strange?" the fire carp asked curiously. The old Master Zhang said, "How can I understand the expressions of immortals?" Jing Jiu flew to a high spot in the sky, accompanied by the bluebird. He felt the scene was somewhat familiar. He didn't recall when he won the tripod and broke through heaven in the Tao competition, but when he ascended in Aoyama more than 100 years ago. The whole world was far away from him, but it entered his field of vision in a different way, making him see it more vividly. The ghostly shadows under the tree in the royal palace of Zhao, the pirate ships on the blue sea had become the ghostly boats, and the academy of Xianyang was haunted. The whole world was filled with ghostly shadows. "Did you do it?" he asked the bluebird. The bluebird retorted, "What the hell are you talking about?" Jing Jiu found that she didn't know anything about it, so he didn't say anything more. He said goodbye to her and left the green sky mirror. As he opened his eyes, what he saw was not the dry and boring cliff wall, but a face that was very close to him. The face was good-looking, with eyebrows and eyes like a painting, but the lines were as sharp as swords, giving off a formidable intent. Though he was familiar with this face, he hadn't seen it at such a close distance, and he could even see his own reflection in the black and white eyes. More importantly, his lips were touching hers. Zhao Liu sat back down and looked at the downstream of the river of lava while holding the green sky mirror, her countenance calm, as if nothing had happened. Jingjiu uttered, with a puzzled expression. Zhao Liu didn't turn around to look at him, but asked straightforwardly, "You don't like it?" Jingjiu said after some thought, "You don't have to wait for me to fall asleep next time." Zhao Liu said, "I'll feel embarrassed if I do that, and there won't be a next time." "It's up to you," said Jingjiu. Zhao Liu suddenly recalled the scene in the brothel she saw on the near Star Building when she and Jingjiu went to Shangzhou City many years ago. "It's indeed meaningless," she said while shaking her head. When the Grandmaster Zhang said that he would make the fire carp into grilled fish, it was merely a joke between friends. It was not a life-threatening matter. But he was different. When he said that he would grill the fire carp, he would kill a fish and then grill it on the fire, unlike the unscrupulous peddlers in the night market of Zhaoga City who fried the fish. "I used to be called the second in the world, but I'm definitely better than you at grilling fish. I haven't even told Tong Yin about the secret recipes." He took out a bamboo tube of water from a stream, intending to boil the fish bones into soup later. The crisp ringing of the bell could be heard in the dense forest. It was unclear what Sensei was doing. Jingjiu and Zhao Liu sat on a higher patch of grass, listening to the ringing of the bell, and he's boasting, thinking that this pair of cultivation partners were indeed harmonious. It didn't take long before Sensei ran out from the forest happily, holding a deer that was knocked out by the clean heart bell in her hand. The snowland had been very quiet in the last few years, and White Town was very warm. The ice and snow turned into streams in the middle of summer, making more green trees and wild animals grow in the mountains. As a result, the dishes had more flavors. Zhao Liu had eaten the 2 barbecued fish by herself. Her mouth was greasy, looking like a greedy child. Jingjiu shot her a glance. Zhao Liu glared at him. Sensei didn't notice the flow of energy. She thought that she would never see Jingjiu again, feeling both happy and sad. She threw herself into Jingjiu's bosom when they parted ways. He coughed twice and looked at Jingjiu, as if he wanted to say something. Jingjiu looked at him in silence, waiting for him to speak. In the end, he didn't ask. He asked because he was smart, and he had sensed the secret of his birth a long time ago. He didn't ask because he was smart. They came to the edge of a cliff after going down the cold stream. White Town was below. Looking down from above, the city was full of prayer flags. It didn't look sacred, but rather messy. Jingjiu and Zhao Liu walked down the cliff and arrived at the small temple. The large Buddha was saving the world in the underworld, and the person sitting on the lotus seat was a little monk. In Jingjiu's eyes, Zen Master would always be the little monk he used to be. Zhao Liu sat on the high threshold and swung her not-so-long braid in front of her. She smiled as she recalled the falling pear blossoms that year. "I heard that you told them about the cause and effect in the 3,000 nunnery, but I don't think that description is appropriate," Jingjiu said to Zen Master. "Rather than saying that Jingyang and I are the upstream and downstream of a river, we are a ball of fire." Having said that, he took out a thin stick and lit it. Then he took out another thin stick and lit it with the flame on the previous stick. Next, he took out a third thin stick. Zen Master realized that it was the pile of thin sticks he had left in the 3,000 nunnery, so he reached out to stop him. I understand. Do you have to do this for such a simple reason? Don't burn it. Chapter 751. Jingjiu handed the thin sticks to Jingjiu, saying, "Though the principle is simple, it's not easy to think of it." Zen Master took the sticks with both of his hands and suddenly asked, "When did you think of this principle?" Jingjiu walked to the doorsill and looked at the snowland in the distance, saying, "I suddenly thought of it one day. It should be when I discussed the soul fire with the king of the underworld in the fiend prison." "Is it because of the name, Soul Fire?" asked Zen Master. "Don't you think this name is illogical? There must be another reason for it." Jingjiu said, "I've asked the Snow Girl about it. They're not like this, but it doesn't mean the humans are not like this." Hearing the name of the Snow Girl, Zen Master shook his head and asked, Are you sure it's a good thing to help her leave? Jingjiu said, It's a matter. It's not important whether it's good or bad. Zhao Liu stood up and followed his line of sight to the deep part of the snowland. Do you want to kill her? She asked. Since Jingjiu came to the snowland, the icy peak had been quiet, and the spiritual awareness didn't show up. This indicated many things. She is not as good as her mother, and it's not easy to kill her. And why should I kill her? I have a good relationship with her mother, said Jingjiu. Zhao Liu said, but she doesn't have a good relationship with her mother. She almost killed her mother. Jingjiu said, her mother had just given birth at the time, so she was at her weakest, and she took the opportunity to leave the snowland without being detected by the heavenly law. Zen Master shook his head, saying, I feel this conversation is a bit strange. Jingjiu nodded slightly to the icy peak in the deep part of the snowland and was about to leave. I won't see you off that day, said Zen Master. Why? Asked Zhao Liu, feeling surprised. Zen Master said with a matter-of-fact expression, What's so interesting about the second marriage? Zen Master didn't go to see Jingjiu off. It was not because he disliked Jingjiu's second love affair, but because the two of them had a special relationship. Zhao City was different for many people. Jingjiu and Zhao Liu first went to the Zhao Garden outside the city to stay for a few days. He could tell that Mr. and Mrs. Zhao did not have many years left to live. Then they went into the city and went to the Imperial Palace to meet Jing Yao. They spent another day strolling through the old and new plum gardens, looking at the pavilion with the chessboard and the small lake with the bridge. Then they went to Taichung Temple. The black eaves of Taichung Temple were washed clean by the summer rain. It looked very spirited, but did not have the spirit of the past. The backyard was filled with purple wildflowers, and the underground prison was getting emptier and emptier. According to Duke Liu, in another 200 years, the last few prisoners would probably die. Many of Duke Liu's descendants had passed away, but the old Duke was still alive. It was unknown whether he would occasionally think of his more deserted neighbors as he looked at his increasingly unfamiliar descendants. Jing Li spent more of his time copying the scripts at the Imperial College, and the Jing house was empty most of the time. Jing Jiu had slept in the study room for more than 100 years, but he was still not familiar with this house. Jing Jiu led Zhao Liu to walk around the front yard and the backyard, and then sat in the study room for half a night. As the morning sunlight illuminated Zhaoga City, Jing Jiu got up and left the place. The empty realm in the blue sky was not far away. It looked like a piece of glass, but it gave off a feeling that it was indestructible. Zhao Liu asked before entering the empty realm, Are we going to the Guocheng Temple? That stone pagoda was still in the Guocheng Temple. Since it was a farewell trip, they should go there. What's the point of looking at the pagoda when the person is gone? Jing Jiu remarked jokingly, I'm not Zhuoruzhui, who can only fall asleep while hugging the pagoda. Zhao Liu confirmed that Jing Jiu was different from before after Nan Wang burned the corpse and woke up in the 3000 nunnery. Of course, it might be due to the influence of Zhuoruzhui on Jing Jiu. As Zen Master said, this was the cause and effect of this world. The muddy river outside Nanhezu was illuminated by the blood-red sword light. Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu stopped on a rock, looking at the straw huts used to provide relief to the refugees on the shore. They saw a middle-aged monk busy treating the wounded, with no time to talk. That monk was the disciple of the pair of master and disciple whom they had met in Nanhezu. For the sake of this pair of master and disciple, Zhao Liu killed some cultivation practitioners and became a wanted criminal by the Pure Heaven Bureau, which led to the subsequent events. Xiao He, Bulo Lin, Zhou Fengchun, Wang Xiaoming. Those stories were so exciting and impressive at the time, but they had been forgotten by the wind now. When they thought of them occasionally, they felt as if they had been in another lifetime. Jing Jiu said, Since we have our own Tao, I shouldn't have restrained you back then. Shooting a glance at him, Zhao Liu asked, Are you sure my Tao is fine? Jing Jiu said, As we discussed back then, why are the cultivation practitioners in the heavenly arrival state called important figures? It's because there are important figures between life and death. Zhao Liu pondered over it. The next step for the cultivation practitioners in the heavenly arrival state is to ascend. If they can't take this step, they are no different from mortals trapped between life and death. Jing Jiu continued, "You chose to face death and live. Though it's dangerous, it'll be much faster than others. Wait until I enter the heavenly arrival state like Peng Lang," said Zhao Liu. "It's not a difficult task," said Jing Jiu. Zhao Liu asked while staring in his eyes, "Are you leaving?" "No hurry," said Jing Jiu. Zhao Liu pulled back her gaze and looked at the countless waves heading eastward in the muddy river, saying, "Don't wait for me." Jing Jiu's intention was clear. He wouldn't leave until she entered the heavenly arrival state. She didn't want to bear this burden. It had nothing to do with the heavy pressure. She just didn't want him to be involved. Jing Jiu didn't respond to her. He took her to Cloudy Town and ordered a hot pot in that restaurant. The red soup and the white soup boiled one after the other, and all kinds of meat and vegetables were put into the pot in order. The fragrance came along with the fog and overflowed the window, mixing with the fog in the town. The door of the private room was tightly shut, but the door of the restaurant was wide open. The owner of the restaurant, of which generation was unknown, was kneeling on the first floor with his whole family, including the manager and the waiters. The residents and commoners of Cloudy Town were kneeling by the street. The innumerable sword lights in the sky had revealed the identity of the man and the woman in the restaurant. Zhao Liu didn't have a good appetite, probably because she didn't like eating under the watchful eyes of others. She put down her chopsticks after eating 3 plates of mutton. The blood-red sword lights illuminated the fog flowing out of Aoyama, going against the current and disappearing among the peaks. She didn't pay any attention to the elders and disciples of Aoyama who had come to greet the sect master, making her displeasure clear. There were no more acquaintances at the South Pine Pavilion. Jing Jiu went straight to the small building and looked at the portraits of the ancestors, stopping in front of himself in the end. Different from the portrait of the Xiantian sect, the immortal Jingyang in this portrait had a clear face because someone had seen it before. Zhao Liu glanced at him, turned around, and left the small building. The sound of a silver bell rang in the quiet forest. 50 sword strings converged in the sunlight and formed a cloud, landing beside him. A bare foot stretched out from the cloud, with a silver bell tied to the ankle, looking very fair. "Huh!" Nan Wang walked out from the cloud and asked Jing Jiu, "What do you think of my painting?" Looking at himself in the portrait in silence, Jing Jiu said calmly, the nostalgia in his eyes fading away. "I look better now," he said. Nan Wang snorted and said, "We've been waiting for many days, but you haven't come back yet. When are you going to leave?" All of Chaotian knew that Jing Jiu was going to ascend. The problem was that nobody knew the exact date, so they had no choice but to come to the Aoyama sect in advance and wait patiently. As the date of ascension was uncertain, the whole world had no choice but to keep waiting, putting all other matters aside. Besides, nobody dared ask about it, except for Nan Wang. Jing Jiu said after some thought, "Let's do it today then. Ascension is definitely going to happen, and it will probably take 2 or 3 chapters to finish the process. It will be a long time before the book is finished, and there are at least 1 million words left. I promised when I started the book that I would write the story after Ascension in earnest, and that I would chat with everybody after Ascension and tell them the general plot." Chapter 752. Jingyang and Jing Jiu stared at each other inside and outside the portrait. It was obvious that the one standing outside the portrait looked better. Jing Jiu was no longer the Jingyang he used to be, but his strength was no different from Jingyang's. When Nan Wang heard Jing Jiu say, "Let's do it today," she had this thought. She shook her head slightly and walked out of the small building. The sunlight shone through the thin fog in the mountains and the branches and leaves on the trees, falling on a nameless stream, giving off a faint and disordered glow, just like her sword string and her mood at the moment. Her white bare feet stepped on the rocks by the stream, bringing her body up quickly, looking like a beautiful mountain ghost. The crisp sound of the silver bell sounded like her laughter in the past. Judging from her appearance, she was still the young girl from the southern barbarians, but in fact, she was not. When they arrived at the top of the peak, there was a large black rock. A flowering tree grew in front of the rock, and many exquisite and lovely wine jars were piled up under the tree. It turned out that this was Qingrong Peak. Nan Wang took out a jar of wine from somewhere and threw it behind him. The jar of wine landed precisely in Jingjiu's hand. Hundreds of years had passed, but the two of them still cooperated so well, as smooth as flowing water. Jingjiu looked at the jar of wine in his hand. After some thought, he opened the jar and took a sip of the wine. Seeing this, Nan Wang's expression became gentler. She walked back to Jingjiu, took the jar of wine, and took a big gulp, exhaling a sweet smell of wine. I burned your remains in that manor cave, not because I hated you and wanted to burn your bones and scatter your ashes, she said softly. Those two kids don't understand you, but do you think I don't? Let me cut off all the karma of your previous life for you. Most of the people who had a close relationship with Jingyang in her previous life were dead, and she was the only one who was still alive. Having heard what Nan Wang said, Jingjiu remained silent for a while, and then uttered At the 3,000 nunnery, Jingjiu said that he knew that Nan Wang hated him so much. He said on purpose. How could he not understand that she understood him? Nan Wang said expressionlessly, Don't learn from Lu Xi. Jingjiu said, Okay. Nan Wang continued, Today, when I met you at the pavilion, I wanted to tell you that the one I like is Jingyang, not the current Jingjiu. However, after thinking about it carefully, this is just an excuse for a shy girl to avoid being rejected by a man. Why would I, Nan Wang, do such a thing? I like you, no matter if you were the Jingyang of the past or the Jingjiu of the present. But since you're leaving, what's the point of saying all this? We can't let you stay and wait for us. It was true that Jingyang didn't wait for Lien Sanhua back then, and he wouldn't wait for anyone this time, which seemed to include Zhao Liu. Jingjiu said, Tell them to go to Shangda Peak. Nan Wang shook her head, saying, I'm not going. After a moment of silence, Jingjiu took the jar of wine from her hand and took a sip as a farewell. The sky was clear and cloudless that day. The clouds were drifting quietly among the peaks. It was a good day for ascension. The whole of the cultivation circle and even the whole of Chaotian had been waiting for this day ever since Jingjiu defeated the godly swordsmen of West Ocean. They had been waiting in Aoyama since early in the morning because they were worried that they would miss the time. Thousands of cultivation practitioners walked out from the Taoist halls on Shuriwei Peak and Shilai Peak after they received the confirmation that day. Compared to the time of ascension more than 100 years ago, the guests at Aoyama had changed a lot. Yuan Qijing and Lu Xi were dead, and so was Pei Baifa. The two most formidable figures in the underworld were dead, and the Grand Master of the Platonist sect, Jing Shu, was dead as well. It was a different world when the wind rose. It was probably because of this reason that Zen Master didn't come this time. These two sentences were copied from the book by Lin Tianxian. Yet, it was still crowded, even more so than last time. All the famous cultivation sects in this story had come to Aoyama, without missing a single one. The important figures of Chaotian had arrived one after another. The first one to arrive was the Emperor Jingyao, followed by the small green curtained sedan. When those cultivation practitioners arrived at Shangda Peak under the guidance of the disciples of Aoyama, they found that the legend was true. Shangda Peak had become a flatland. The Shangda Peak, which used to be covered with white snow and green pine trees, had become a huge black jade plate with a radius of 1 square mile. Silently, a huge black dog crouched in the middle of the black jade plate, looking like a peak. Or, he would be the Shangda Peak in the future. The cultivation practitioners of various sects knew that he was the legendary principal guard of Aoyama, the Master Night Howler. Thinking of the scene of the heavenly dog eating the sun when Jingjiu and Bai Jinren were engaged in a desperate battle, and thinking of the rumored heavenly dog's unparalleled magic power and ruthlessness, the people couldn't help but feel intimidated. They bowed to him from a distance, not daring to approach him. Greetings, Housemaster. Greetings, Saint. A commotion broke out among the peaks. The cultivation practitioners of various sects bowed in a certain direction, showing their genuine respect. The person who came was the house master of Yamatsai, Bu Xiao, and the scholars of the house. In this battle of the destruction of the world, Yamatsai had paid the heaviest price, just like what he had done in many previous major events. Even Bu Xiao's favorite student, Shi Yun, had died at the hands of Baizhunren. Soon after, the people of the Platonist sect and the Mirror sect also arrived. Sitting in the wheelchair, the master of the Platonist sect, Chun Shueqiao, didn't have the patience to exchange pleasantries with the cultivation practitioners of other sections. All she did was look at the deep part of Aoyama with a peculiar glow in her eyes, as if she was trying to guess which peak was Jingjio's residence. The reopening of the No Mercy sect received a grand welcome. It was because they were the staunchest ally of the Aoyama sect, and it was also because of the long talk between Jingjio and Peng Lang that night. Looking at the young sect master walking in the front, the cultivation practitioners of various sects were astounded, wondering if the rumor was true. If this young sect master, named Peng Lang, was already in the heavenly arrival state, wouldn't he be even more formidable than the immortal Jingyang? The Zhongzhou school was even more astounded. Nobody expected that the Aoyama sect, which had formed a blood feud with the Aoyama sect, would send someone to attend the ceremony. What was even more unexpected was that the person walking in the front was Tong Yin. Even the Zhongzhou school had come, so the Kunlun sect and those small sects in the north wouldn't be left behind. Many free-traveling practitioners had plucked up their courage and barged into the ceremony. To their surprise, the Aoyama sect didn't expel them. Fortunately, the black jade plate that the Shangda Peak had turned into was really large. No matter how many people stood on it, they looked like sesame seeds. Yet, the Aoyama sect was bustling with activity. Amid the bustling activity, nobody noticed that a person wearing a conical hat had walked under a large tree. A red line appeared in the tranquil sea of clouds. It was the light and shadow of the thoughtless sword. Jingjio landed on a huge black jade plate. The mountain peaks suddenly became silent. Everyone stood up and looked at him. His fluttering white robe was extremely eye-catching. Behind him stood Zhao Liu, Lu Shisui, Yuan Chu, Kane Yang, Ping Yongka, Apiao, and Zhuoruzhui. More sword lights fell on the black jade plate. There were second-generation elders, such as Guang Yuan Jinren, Mei Li, and Qi Yan. There were also third-generation disciples, such as Guanan Shan, Gu Han, Lei Il Qiang, Lin Wuji, and Yao Songshan. There were also some young disciples whose names even Yuan Chu couldn't remember. Even Fang Jingtian and the three elders of the Hermit Peaks had come. Jingjio walked to the front of the dead dog with a white cat in his arms, and found a comfortable place to sit down, waving his hand. Guang Yunjinren understood his intention and led the members of the Aoyama sect to disperse. Zhao Liu, Lu Shisui, and the others sat down not far away. Thousands of cultivation practitioners bowed respectfully and then sat down. Under the gazes of countless people, Jingjio lowered his head, stroking the cat slowly with his right hand. He didn't intend to speak, as if he were waiting for someone. Ada enjoyed the moment with narrowed eyes, wondering who in the world was qualified to make him wait. Many people had the same question as Ada, but fortunately, the puzzle was solved soon. A large hole broke open in the thick sea of clouds, bringing up a gust of wind that sounded like a bell. The gust of wind fell on the dead dog, making his black hair wave like the waves of wheat. Meanwhile, it washed away all the gravel and dust on the black jade plate. A large Buddha statue with mottled golden paint appeared in front of the dead dog, standing not far away from the side of Jingjio. "Sorry for being late," said the Buddha statue in a deep and perfect voice. Compared to Jingjio, this large Buddha statue was extremely large, giving off a dignified and intimidating aura. Compared to the dead dog, this large Buddha statue was like the statues in the shrines worshipped by the mortals in their homes, looking rather adorable. The cultivation practitioners of various sects who had just sat down stood up again, bowing respectfully to the large Buddha statue. After the world-ending battle between Taiping Jinren and Bai Zhenren, many secrets of the cultivation world have been uncovered, including the golden body of the broadsword King Chao Yuan. But this was the first time for many cultivation practitioners to see it with their own eyes. They couldn't help but feel amazed and speechless. Yet, no matter how marvelous and astounded they had to control their emotions because the focus of the day was on Jingjiu. Tong Yin turned up her palm, and the scenic cloud bell flew up from her palm, hovering in midair. Chao Yuan flicked his finger in the air, and the broadsword will turn into a gust of strong wind, landing on the scenic cloud bell precisely. Whoosh! Countless thunderous sounds spread out in all directions, passing through the peaks of Aoyama and arriving in every corner of Chaotian, and even the deep part of the ocean and the royal palace in the alien land. As a result, the whole world knew that the time was up. Chapter 753. The thunderous ringing of the bell passed through the thatched huts, the Taoist halls, the large clans, the small boats on the river, the godly boats on the ocean, and the snowy mountains. Everybody could hear the ringing of the bell. The giant on his way home on the other side of the ocean turned his head to look in the direction of Chaotian, the corners of his mouth curling up, revealing an honest and happy smile. Gu Qing ran to the back of the godly boat as quickly as he could and looked in the direction of the ringing of the bell, his eyes wet. On the lonely icy peak in the deep part of the snowland, the cliff wall looked like a piece of glass. A short figure appeared there, gazing at the south. It was unclear what was on his mind. If a line was drawn between the icy peak and Aoyama, the small temple in White Town would be on the line. It meant that the queen of the Snowy Kingdom could see the small temple at any time when she looked at Aoyama. As such, it was understandable that Zen Master didn't sit on the lotus seat, but crouched under the incense table and played with the small wooden sticks. I still don't understand why you didn't go to Aoyama when the immortal ascended today, he said while crouching on the ground. Zen Master said, "You will fly to the highest place when you ascend. You can see it no matter where you are. Why do you have to go there?" He thought what he said was reasonable, but what could he see if he crouched under the incense table? Sitting on the doorsill, Sensei said while looking at the south, "The immortal must have talked about something before he ascended. It's a pity that we can't hear him." Zen Master said in a mocking tone, "Based on his temperament, he will simply swing his sword. There's no reason to talk about it." "Did you see him talk about it last time?" Sensei said angrily. "I was only 9 years old last time. Grandma didn't take me there. How would I know?" Zen Master's fingers trembled after being rebuked, and he almost dropped the pile of wooden sticks. "All in all, that guy doesn't know how to reason with people," he said grumpily. Only Taiping Jinren and he, the old friends of Jingyang, knew the origin of the phrase "kill with one sword." He looked puzzled and said, "Back then, Zen Master, you once went to Shinma Peak and asked the enlightened being. You sat across from him for 100 days. What did the enlightened being talk about?" Zen Master thought that they really were a pair of Tao companions made in heaven. He sneered. "In those 100 days, he treated me like a child. Every night, he would tell me a story to lull me to sleep. What else do you think he could tell?" When he spoke of the past, his face was full of mockery, but his eyes were filled with deep nostalgia and reluctance. The sound of the bell faded into the distance like the wind. What followed was Jingjiu's voice. His voice was as light as before, without any coldness or taste. It was still like the wind dispersing around the black jade plate. "I was born in this world, and you're also born in this world. This is the karma between us. Today, I will leave, so I will speak with you." Hearing what Jingjiu said, the cultivation practitioners of various sects sat upright with a solemn expression on their faces. In their opinion, what the immortal would say before his ascension must be very important and helpful to their cultivation, so they shouldn't miss even one word. Unfortunately, they were too far away and couldn't see the expression on the immortal's face clearly, wondering if it would have any effect on their cultivation. "I don't know how to talk about the principles, but I can tell some stories. I will tell 3 stories today." Though Jing Jiu spoke casually, The expressions on the faces of those who had vaguely guessed what he meant had changed slightly. Zhao Liu thought that Jing Jiu had only asked 2 questions, but how could he tell 3 stories? Chao Yuan thought that Jing Jiu was the one who would ascend. Why did he tell his stories? Bu Xiao thought that if the stories Jing Jiu told had something to do with him, he would still want to ascend, even if Jing Jiu was the fairy lady. Jing Jiu would have so many disciples and disciples after his ascension. Didn't he worry about it? Under the distant big tree, the person wearing the conical hat stood up and stroked the rough bark of the tree with his palm. Looking at the blue sky, the color of the tree leaves reflected on his face. It was unclear what he was thinking. The rest of the cultivation practitioners didn't think too much about it. Countless magic methods and profundities in the world were hidden in the seemingly simple stories. This was what the Zen sects were good at. It turned out that the immortal was going to tell the stories that day. Jing Jiu grabbed Ada by the neck and put him in Zhao Liu's bosom. He began telling the first story after he took a glance at the large Buddha statue. A few hundred years ago, there were 2 major clans in Jui City. One of them had the family name of Shi, and the other had the family name of Chao. The 2 clans had been competing for benefits for many years, with some victories and defeats. It wasn't until the Chao clan had a powerful family master who married a free-traveling practitioner of the Dongi Daoist sect that the Chao clan had completely suppressed the Shi clan. Though the family master and his wife had a high cultivation state, they had no hope of ascension. As their lives were about to end, they wanted to leave behind a descendant. The beginning of the story was quite ordinary and straightforward. It was hard to discern the meaning of the story, but the crowd was listening attentively. Guinanshan suddenly found that Guhan's expression was not quite right. "What's wrong?" he asked in a low voice. Guhan said with a slightly pale face, "A shocking murder had taken place in Jui City back then." The Gu clan was a major clan dependent on the Aoyama sect, so they were well aware of the lineage of the clans in Chaotian. Yet Guinanshan didn't know much about it, asking, "So what?" Guhan didn't talk about the murder again. He looked at the large Buddha statue in the distance and asked in a low voice, "What is the family name of the Broadsword King? Is Grandmaster going to tell the story of the Broadsword King?" Guinanshan asked with a slightly changed expression. As the 2 of them conversed, Jing Jiu was still telling the story. The couple in charge of the Chao clan were fully aware that their methods were too forceful and cruel, especially since the Shi clan had been suppressed badly. After the 2 of them passed away, the Shi clan would definitely retaliate. If Madame Chao's child was a regular person who couldn't cultivate, it would be fine. Even if the Chao clan was on the decline, they could live an ordinary life. If the child was extremely talented, like someone with natural Tao quality, they could send him to the Zhongzhou school or the Aoyama sect. The Shi clan wouldn't dare do anything to him. For a moment, they didn't know whether the child they were expecting was a genius or a mediocre person. Madame Chao got pregnant amidst this complicated anticipation. What puzzled them was that the child was quite ordinary, with nothing special about him. Though he had some talent, he wasn't mediocre, but he wasn't the kind of person who would make people's eyes light up. This was the most troublesome situation. The Zhongzhou school and the Aoyama sect would definitely look down on this child. But the Shi clan would pay great attention to this child because he could cultivate, and they might even want to kill him. How could they protect this child? The couple used only one night to come up with a solution, which was to wipe out the Shi clan before they passed away. Hearing Jing Jiu's words, more and more cultivators, like Guhan, recalled the tragedy that happened in Jui City hundreds of years ago, and their expressions changed slightly. That tragedy was too famous because the couple was too ruthless. The world often talked about the tragedy of family being wiped out, but the one that the Shi clan suffered was the real one. From the direct descendants of the Shi clan to the stewards and the entire clan, they were all killed by the Chao clan in a very short period of time. Not a single person was spared. Even the Jianghu masters who were on good terms with the Shi clan were singled out by the couple and killed. The whole of Jui City seemed to have been massacred. In order to carry out such an evil deed, the Chao clan also paid a great price and gradually disappeared in the long river of history. It was only today that Jing Jiu mentioned it. After the Chow couple finished doing these things, they went to Machio and paid their respects to the abbot of the Guocheng temple and asked him a question. The two of us knew that we had committed a great sin, but did it have anything to do with this child? The abbot said that the child was innocent, but what you did was really evil and stupid. You killed all the friends of the Sher clan, but friends still have friends, and relatives still have relatives. How could you kill them all? After you died, wouldn't the friends of the friends and the relatives of the relatives transfer their hatred to the child? The people present felt that there was something wrong when they heard the story, and now they thought that it was indeed so. When Madame Chow heard the words of the abbot of the Guocheng temple, she realized that she had made a great mistake. Master Chow said to the abbot that he had killed so many people to show him. The abbot was puzzled and thought, what does this mean? If the world knew about this child's background, he would not live long. Master Chow was sure of this, so you would definitely hide it for him. Only then did the abbot know that the Chow couple had the idea of sending the child to the Guocheng temple. Having heard this part of the story, the people had already figured out what was going on. Countless gazes with complicated emotions fell on the large Buddha. The face of the large Buddha was full of mottled paint, devoid of any sadness or joy, showing only the vicissitudes of life. The abbot couldn't understand it. He said that the Chow family had declined because of your decision, and that they would be attacked after your death. Didn't you care about the lives of your relatives and subordinates? The Chow couple eyed each other and said in unison that they didn't care. Madame Chow looked at the child in her bosom affectionately, saying that it would be fine as long as he could live a peaceful life. Having said that, the Chow couple committed suicide, and the child was left in the Guocheng temple. The first half of the story had been told. It was simple, but not simple at the same time. What the Chow couple had done was exceedingly bloody and dreadful. It was unclear if their idea was correct, but at least the child had lived to this day and become the most outstanding figure in Chaotian. Looking at the large Buddha, the people realized that the master broadsword king had such a strange background. They were rendered speechless for a moment. Chow Yuan said, "This story has many inaccuracies. For instance, the part about my mother looking at me affectionately. But how do you know the expression in her eyes at the time?" This is what San Yue said. Jingjiu said, "This story was related to the secret of Chow Yuan's background and a bloody and cruel past, which would have a negative impact on his reputation, the reputation of the Guocheng Temple and the Windy Broadsword Church. It was because of Lien Sanyue that Jingjiu knew this story." Many years ago by the lake, Chow Yuan was merely a young monk who had just left the temple gate when he told this story to Lien Sanyue while wiping away his tears. Lien Sanyue didn't like to write stories, and she didn't like to add fuel to the fire, and she was also too lazy to do so. The word affectionate must have been Chow Yuan's own narration. But how could a newborn baby remember the expression in his mother's eyes? This was either Chow Yuan's imagination after he grew up, or he was not a regular person from the moment he was born. However, his talent was so special that the Chow couple didn't even notice it. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain how a child with ordinary talent could become so powerful in the future. After a moment of silence, Chow Yuan said, "In fact, the Sher family is not completely wiped out. It's not an easy task for my parents to eliminate them completely. There are many people with the surname Sher at the Windy Broadsword Church," said Jingjiu. Upon hearing this, there was an uproar in the crowd. Many years ago, Chow Yuan left the Guocheng Temple and started to travel in the mortal world. He joined the Windy Broadsword Church as a regular disciple and participated in the Plum meeting as a regular disciple. Later, to everyone's surprise, he didn't choose to return to the Guocheng Temple, but stayed at the Windy Broadsword Church. He led this small church to grow in the dangerous north with great difficulty until it became a hegemon of a region. The cultivation circle thought that he did it because he was sentimental about his old love, but after hearing this story and the conversation between Jingjiu and Chow Yuan, they realized that there was more to it than meets the eye. "That's right," said Chow Yuan. "Do they know about it?" asked Jingjiu. "Yes," said Chow Yuan. "Do they hate you?" pressed Jingjiu. "Since they can't defeat me, It's not important whether they hate me or not. Chao Yuan continued while looking at Jing Jiao. But what do you intend to explain by telling this story of mine? Not all stories have to explain something, but this one of yours can. Jing Jiao looked at the cultivation practitioners and said while pointing to the large Buddhist statue, his parents killed thousands of people and did many evil things for his birth. As such, he thought he was a sinful person born with evil inside and out, and he couldn't wash himself clean no matter what he did. He didn't even expect to atone for his sins. All he wanted was to make the deaths of thousands of people worthwhile. As such, he hasn't left the snowland since he went there. Guarding the wind and snow by himself was the evaluation and admiration of the world for Chao Yuan. Nobody had expected such a story. He had done the same thing in the underworld, and it was believed that he would keep doing it. What he did was not atone for his sins, but when would he be freed? Why couldn't he ascend? It was because he thought he couldn't repay the debt. But why did he have to repay the debt owed by his parents? Why did the descendants have to bear the consequences of the predecessors? All in all, there is only one reason, said Jing Jiao while looking at the large Buddha statue. You can't get over it. Chao Yuan had guarded White Town for hundreds of years. Besides what had been mentioned, there were other reasons like Lien Sanyue, but Jing Jiao didn't want to talk about it. This story was not about the evil karma leading to the good karma, but about the fact that one couldn't get over it. If one couldn't get over it, why would heaven open up for him? Chapter 754. It was quiet among the peaks of Aoyama. The people were still shocked by the identity of the Broadsword King and the last statement made by Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao didn't give them too much time. He started telling the second story. Looking at a large tree in front of a peak, Jing Jiao said to the man wearing the conical hat, "Come here." The man took off the conical hat, showing a bitter smile on his green face. He was Su Zai. Su Zai walked toward Jing Jiao in the deep part of the black jade plate, attracting countless gazes and causing a commotion. This former young master of the mysterious dark sect could be said to be the only formidable figure among the deviant sections. The term "the only one" might not be appropriate. In short, he was the last one. Many people knew that he was still alive, and he even had a secret relationship with the Windy Broadsword Church and the mysterious Heaven sect. Otherwise, how could he defeat the Kunlun sect? The huge dark figure behind him was also well aware that it was the Aoyama sect. Yet, Jing Jiao had revealed Su Zai's whereabouts. Did he intend to tell the whole world about it? The immortal acted more casually now that the ascension was imminent. Su Chiga was the previous sect master of the mysterious dark sect. He had cultivated the deviant methods for too long, so he had some problems in his mind. He believed in some stupid theories, but he was extremely heartless and cruel. He poisoned his pregnant wife, turning her into a half-dead person. Then, he used the ghost pendant to draw the soul into her body. In this way, the fetus in the belly of the dead woman would be the so-called demon fetus. When the demon fetus was born, he would swallow it and turn into a demon infant, helping him to achieve a high cultivation state. Su Zai walked on the black ground, his footsteps soundless. He walked at a fast pace, though he seemed to walk slowly. By the time Jing Jiao had finished speaking, he had already arrived by his side. He stood there in silence, devoid of any expression on his face. If a newborn baby can sense the affection of its mother, what about this demon fetus? The first part of the statement was about Chao Yuan, and the second part was about Su Zai. Jing Jiao looked at him and asked, "The devil fetus is born with spiritual consciousness. It knows that it is living in its mother's corpse and that it will become its father's elixir when it is born. How does it feel?" After some thought, Su Zai said calmly, desperate and angry. Not many cultivation practitioners knew about this secret, but many of them knew that Su Zai had successfully plotted against his father at a young age and obtained the real power of the mysterious dark sect with the help of the elders. According to the story told by Jing Jiao was merely a devil embryo placed in the corpse of Su Chiga's wife, and he would be swallowed as soon as he was born. As such, how did he survive and plot against his own father? The demonic fetus swallowed some of his mother's flesh and blood during its development and turned into a baby ahead of time. As Su Chiga swallowed the demonic fetus into his body, he didn't have enough time to temper it and was poisoned by the corpse poison. Later, the demonic fetus broke out of his body, paralyzing Su Chiga. He lived a life worse than death for many years, until he was killed by Lu Ci with a swing of his sword. The expression on Su Zai's face didn't change, as if he were listening to someone else's story calmly. An uproar broke out among the peaks. It was not because Su Chiga had spent a great deal of effort to obtain the Tao of the demonic sect at the expense of his wife and son had been destroyed, nor was it because of the fact that an infant was willing to risk his life to survive. It was because of the first half of the story. The devil embryo had turned into a baby ahead of time by swallowing his mother's corpse, and he had the ability to protect himself with the corpse poison. To say nothing of the orthodox cultivation practitioners, even those of the deviant sects found it hard to accept such a thing. Jingjiu said, "If this is the evil cause caused by his father, then he is the evil karma. What about his mother? Why does she have to bear this karma?" As such, the second story he told was not about the karma, but about a breath. "Why is the world we live in called Chaotian?" asked Jingjiu. The crowd wondered if it was necessary to ask this question. It was because the path toward heaven and the cultivation practitioners wished to ascend to heaven. Jingjiu said, "A man will die facing heaven and live 10,000 years if he doesn't." I like this meaning. The crowd was shocked speechless, wondering if the name of Chaotian could be explained in such a way. Su Zai felt like crying, but he smiled faintly. He stooped slowly and bowed to Jingjiu to express his gratitude. "A man will die facing heaven and live 10,000 years if he doesn't. A man will die." Bu Xiao recited these two indecent sentences, but he felt they had a deeper meaning as he recited them. "I think this is the meaning of living toward death," he said. Jingjiu said, "That sentence is too indecent." Bu Xiao still couldn't fully agree with such a way of living, saying, "If this saying means that you can do anything as long as you are alive, then we can also deduce another conclusion. As long as you know you're going to die, you can do anything as long as you are alive. Does it mean that all of us are nothing but illusions?" The first two stories told by Jingjiu were extremely tragic, be it the birth of Chao Yuan or the birth of Su Zai. Did he really intend to tell them this? Your deduction is correct, but there is a flaw. Why do we have to die? Jingjiu knew what he intended to say, saying while waving his hand, "It's true that I can't prove eternal life, but I don't know when I'll die or if I'll die." As such, I was certain that all of this was an illusion when I was born. It turned out that he was telling his own story. Many cultivation practitioners of small sects thought they had guessed it a long time ago, showing a knowing expression on their faces. Yet, Zhao Liu and the others didn't expect that Jingjiu would be interested in talking about himself before he left this world. There was no plum meeting back then, and the rule of the imperial court was very weak. The world was in chaos. Many people would die every once in a while, and the emperor would change every few years. I was born in the most chaotic royal palace in Zhaoga City. Though it was chaotic, it was nevertheless the royal palace, where I could live a luxurious life. I hadn't done anything yet, and my talent in cultivation was discovered at a young age. The major cultivation sects fought for me for a few years, and the Grandmaster won in the end. It was said that the immortal Dao Yuan was the #1 cultivator in the world at the time. Who could have expected that he would be plotted against by Nan Chu when he ascended? Well, I didn't expect it either. From this point of view, I've indeed inherited his mantle. For Jingjiu, this was a straightforward story, but it was quite amusing. It was the first time that the disciples of Aoyama found the immortal sect master to have such an interesting side. What followed was a well-known story. Even if the cultivation practitioners of the peaks of Aoyama and the peaks of Aoyama were interested and patient enough to listen to his story, Jingjiu didn't have the patience to do so. In short, he was brought back to Aoyama by the immortal Dayuan. Tai Pingzhenren asked to be his disciple on behalf of his master. Then Nanchu sneak attacked him. The Grand Master and his master died one after the other. The branch of Shangda Peak was suppressed. Taiping Jinren went to the underworld as a spy and brought back the king of the underworld. The peaks were bathed in blood after a hot pot meal, and Taiping Jinren stayed behind death doors after another hot pot meal. 300 years later, Jingyang failed in his ascension and was reincarnated. Taiping Jinren escaped from the prison, and the two brothers continued their grudges. The history of Chaotian over the last few hundred years was basically the history of the struggle between these two brothers. They were the most dangerous opponents and enemies of each other in the previous two lives, and they also knew each other the best. Now, Taiping Jinren was dead, and Jingjiu was the only one who was still alive. Jingjiu had become the oldest and most boring legend in this world. What kind of person am I? This was the last question Jingjiu posed to this world, as well as to himself. What kind of person was the immortal Jingyang or Jingjiu? The whole of Chaotian didn't have a clear understanding of him. The descriptions of him being indifferent to the affairs of the world, indifferent in temperament, and exceedingly talented were all superficial and useless descriptions. His temperament and image were always vague, and his face seemed to be shrouded by a layer of fog. It was even harder to see through him than the fog surrounding Bai Junren. It doesn't matter if I don't care about the affairs of the world, but it doesn't mean I can't. I've already predicted many things when I was in that small village. Upon hearing this, Lu Shui recalled the pond, the big tree by the pond, the bamboo chair under the tree, and the youth in white lying on the chair. He asked Jingjiu what he was doing back then, and Jingjiu told him that he was calculating the future 3,000 years. It had only been a little more than 100 years since that day, and the whole of Chaotian had already become Aoyamas. That was why Jingjiu didn't care about destroying the inherited heaven sword. I won't copy this part. The people can calculate the relationship between all the sects and the Aoyamas sect by themselves. Yet, there were still many things that couldn't be calculated. It was because those people had their own thoughts and beliefs. As a result, they left. Earlier, Jingjiu said that he appreciated the saying that he would live 10,000 years if he didn't die. In fact, he meant that he appreciated Suzai. This was also a calculation. It was believed that the Kunlun sect would give away a spiritual source in a few years. What else did Jingjiu calculate? Jingjiu shot Peng Lang a glance. Thinking of the conversation at the 3,000 nunnery that night and the evaluation of his name by the immortal, Peng Lang somehow felt uneasy. Many people say that I have a cold temperament, but it's only because this Tao body is a bit special. In fact, this Tao body is quite useful, so you don't have to feel sorry for me. Jingjiu continued while looking at Zhao Liu and Lu Shui, and I'll give up this Tao body one day. Hearing this, Zhao Liu and Lu Shui felt both comforted and puzzled, wondering what he would use if he gave up this Tao body. Ping Yongka reacted the most, wondering that his master didn't even think highly of the all-in-one sword. Chapter 755. Why do I have to abandon this Tao body? We need to figure out what I am. Jingjiu fixed his line of sight on the stream among the distant peaks, which looked like a golden whip under the sunlight of noon. My previous life and my current life are not the upstream and downstream of the same river. There's an interesting analogy in the Zen sects to describe this cause and effect. He pulled back his line of sight and raised his right forefinger. A sword fire was ignited on the tip of his finger. Take this ball of fire, for example. If I use it to light a wooden stick, then use the fire on that stick to light another wooden stick, and continue to burn like this, would the fire on the last wooden stick and the ball of fire on my fingertip be the same fire? Or are they different fires? Note, this paragraph was copied from Ikeda's public account. It was deathly quiet among the peaks. Lying in Zhao Liu's bosom, Ada narrowed his eyes as he looked at the ball of fire on Jingjiu's fingertip. It was easy to understand this analogy of the Zen sects, but it was not suitable for Jingjiu's situation. As expected, Jingjiu asked, if these are connected but different flames, what color am I now? When different objects were ignited, the color and brightness of the flames would be different. For instance, the flames of the stick, the coal, the sword, and the paper would be different. Jingjiu didn't like this, or in other words, he didn't like the continuation of his current self. He said to Ping Yongka, "So, I have to take off my clothes, abandon the Tao body, and throw away the stick." Ping Yongka understood now. This was how he left the All-in-One. This was how Qing flew out of the green sky mirror. This was how the snow girl abandoned this world. There was no stick, coal, sword, or paper, but only the flames. This was the cultivation state Jingjiu was pursuing. But he hadn't reached that state yet. Who was he then? "I am the direction of all the causes and effects of my life." Jingjiu said this again. He looked at this world. The cultivation practitioners among the peaks could all sense his gaze. The peaks of Aoyama could sense it too. The restaurant owners in the distant cloudy town could sense it too. Jingli had sensed it in Jiaoga City. The blue bird on one of the branches felt it. The Zen master in the small temple felt it. Gu Qing, who was in the sea, felt it. By fate, we met here, and we were born. Jingjiu looked at Zhao Liu, but it was as if he was looking at the entire world. The entire world was extremely quiet. Everyone was waiting for him to say his last words before he ascended. No one knew what he would say. It must be extremely beautiful. He said, "Let's go." A sword light soared into the sky. In the blink of an eye, he had reached a very high place in the sky. The next moment, he entered the emptiness realm. Jingjiu was nowhere to be seen. Looking at the sword light that was leaving quickly, Chan Xueqiao gently punched the armrest of the wheelchair and said regretfully, "He left just like that." She could not stand up and could only sit in the wheelchair. Everyone in the mountains had already stood up. They looked at the sky attentively, feeling a bit excited and a bit nervous. The sword light could be seen in every corner of Chaotian. Countless mortals walked out of their houses and looked at the sky, their expressions bewildered or excited. Aside from the departure of the snow girl, this was the first time the human race had an ascendant after many years. How could they not feel nervous? Normally, Jingjiu had mastered the all-in-one sword formation and had an unimaginably high cultivation state, so it was natural for him to ascend. However, the heavenly law was just, the stronger the ascendant was, the more formidable the heavenly punishment would be. The snow girl was a being of the highest cultivation state in Chaotian, so she had encountered the most formidable heavenly punishment. If not for the passage left by the fairy lady Byron, she might not have been able to get out. Jingjiu was known as the strongest swordsman of the human race since ancient times. How formidable would the heavenly punishment be? More importantly, nobody had forgotten that he had already failed once. Heaven and earth responded. Countless thunderstorms came out from the thunder region, spinning at an unimaginably high speed and gathering together. In the end, they formed a huge whirlpool of thunderstorms heading toward the sword light. Looking up from the ground, the huge whirlpool of thunderstorms looked like a large and eerie eye, heading toward the ground with an unimaginable energy. The strong wind whistled. Cloudy Town and the neighboring Zhou County kicked up a great deal of sand and pebbles. The mortals fled to avoid the thunderstorms, not daring to take another look at the sky. The cultivation practitioners had good eyesight. They could see that the bright threads in the whirlpool of thunderstorms were in fact unimaginably thick lightning bolts. They couldn't help but feel astonished, thinking that even a figure in the heavenly arrival state would be turned into ashes when encountering such powerful lightning bolts. There were probably tens of millions of lightning bolts in the whirlpool of thunderstorms. How could Jingjiu pass through it? Crack! The lightning bolts were summoned and struck down from the whirlpool of thunderstorms, hitting the sword light squarely. A barrage of surprise screams broke out among the peaks of Aoyama. Zhao Liu and the others turned to look at Ping Yongka as fast as they could. Ping Yongka looked bewildered. He shook his head, indicating that he didn't feel anything. The flash of lightning didn't have any effect on the sword light, vanishing without a trace in an instant. Soon after, dozens of flashes of lightning landed on the sword light and dispersed, causing no harm to Jingjiu. Seeing this, the cultivation practitioners in the peaks of Aoyama finally relaxed a little. The next moment, they saw an even more terrifying scene. The whirlpool of thunderstorms spun faster and faster. It was as if the entire sky was spinning. Tens of millions of lightning bolts kept converging and merging, growing thicker and thicker. In the end, it seemed like it was about to turn into a mountain of lightning, emitting an extremely bright light. When the sky began to spin, the cultivation practitioners with lower states couldn't bear it anymore. They felt nauseous and wanted to vomit, so they had to sit down cross-legged and meditate to recover. When all the lightning bolts converged and emitted a light that was far brighter than the sun, most of the cultivation practitioners couldn't bear it anymore. They lowered their heads and didn't dare to look at it again. Guanyin Jinren and the other cultivation practitioners stared at the scene in the sky, their expressions extremely solemn. This lightning could probably turn everything in the world into nothingness. Could Jing Jiu withstand it? Jing Jiu was getting closer and closer to the extremely bright lightning. His face was illuminated so brightly that it seemed like it was glowing. The unimaginable pressure and blazing light seemed like it was going to ignite the emptiness realm. Such a terrifying heaven's tribulation had never appeared in history. I am indeed the strongest. At such a tense moment, he suddenly had such a thought. Logically speaking, there was nothing wrong with this statement, but it was too hot-blooded. It was as if he was still a child who had just entered Aoyama. Most of the Ascenders would choose to hide or endure the heaven's tribulation when they encountered it. They would wait until the heavenly Tao's test was over and the heaven's tribulation dispersed on its own. Jing Jiu wouldn't do that. He didn't do that last time. The problem was, even if he could control all things into a sword, there was nothing in the emptiness realm. What should he do then? The whooshing sound of the wind suddenly appeared in the eternally silent emptiness realm. It was the air that he summoned from below, and the clouds and mist that came along with the air. Countless clouds and mists were pulled into thin threads and came to his side like swords, piercing toward the extremely bright lightning above. Last time when he ascended, he chopped the sky with one sword. This time when he ascended, he chopped the sky with 10,000 swords. Countless bolts of lightning and sword lights that were even brighter than the lightning appeared in the sky. They intertwined and formed a dense net of light. The world became extremely bright, and even the deep and gloomy ocean became transparent. Shockingly, the lightning coming out from the whirlpool of thunderstorms also had a sharp edge, as if they had turned into swords. However, they didn't hack toward Jing Jiu anymore, but turned around and flew toward the sky. Using the heaven's tribulation to fight against the heaven's tribulation, is it possible? The astonished voice of Shui Yu Nunnery came out from the small green curtained sedan. Bu Xiao remarked sentimentally, "Both the lightning and the thunderstorms are part of everything." Chao Yuan remarked thoughtfully, "It turns out that the so-called heavenly path is also a part of our heaven and earth." The whirlpool of thunderstorms that occupied the entire sky had vanished. The blue sky reappeared in front of everybody, but the sword lights were still there. The sword lights were the lightning, the clouds, and the air. They flashed and crisscrossed in the sky, looking like tens of thousands of shooting stars that would never fall down, forming a beautiful scene. Tens of thousands of sword lights had gradually faded away, disappearing from Ada's gloomy and cold pupils. Ada was in Zhao Leyu's bosom. Back when the immortal Jingyang ascended, Zhao Leyu didn't even take a look at him when she carried Insan's body and headed toward the outside of Cloudy Town. She didn't miss a single glance that day. Looking at the tens of thousands of floating clouds with a golden edge and the disappearing sword lights, Zhao Leyu remained silent. Even if he didn't come back, she could still go out to look for him. But what if she couldn't find him? Ascension was a separation of life and death. She experienced the feeling of being on the verge of death in silence. A wild grass sprouted by her feet. This world was so dark that it resembled the body of Dead Dog. This world was so cold that it resembled the hometown of the Snow Girl. The moment the tens of thousands of sword lights disappeared from the eyes of the enchanting cat, the space in this dark and cold world suddenly twisted, and a crack appeared. A flash of light flew out from the crack at an unimaginable speed and then stopped abruptly, revealing the figure of Jingjiu. He turned around to look at the place for which he had come. It was a patch of nothingness. Chapter 756. The whirlpool of thunder and lightning occupying the entire sky was actually not formidable. As far as he was concerned, those flashes of lightning were more like the replenishment of spiritual energy. The flashes of lightning during the second half of his ascension were more troublesome to deal with. It was because they were not real flashes of lightning, but the cracks in the space. There was a powerful force in heaven and earth that prevented him from leaving and attempted to pull him back to the ground, even tearing the space apart. It was at that moment that he used the all-in-one sword formation to ascertain that the space and this force were still a part of the heaven and earth of Chaotian. As such, it was easy to deal with them. Jingjiu turned around and flew toward a certain direction. Then, he found that his speed had slowed down considerably. It was evident that this world had different rules compared to the world of Chaotian, and it had nothing in common with the fairy world described in the classics of the cultivation practitioners. It was even colder than the snowland and emptier than the empty realm. The boundless and boundless world gave off a dreadful sense of oppression. Any living being with spiritual awareness would feel lonely, small, and fearful here. A small white fireball was hovering in the distant space, emitting a faint glow. The outline of Jingjiu's body had a faint silvery edge. He flew with his back to the white fireball for a while. A few objects appeared vaguely in front of him, reflecting the light. There was no coffin in this dark and cold, boundless world, nor was there a tombstone as big as a mountain. There was only a bamboo chair. Jingjiu flew to the front of the bamboo chair and lay on it. He didn't intend to leave right after his ascension. He intended to stay here for a while. It had nothing to do with the fact that Byron didn't dare leave. It was merely that the barrier of that world was too thin and could be easily seen. It had something to do with him. Both he and the immortal Tan had heard the feint uttered by the snow girl after her ascension. What had she encountered? The flying demons of the outside world, or tens of thousands of burning flying swords? Jingjiu had to be cautious, and he also wanted to familiarize himself with the environment here. The light emitted by the distant fireball shone on his face, but it was blurry and devoid of any heat. Jingjiu reached out his finger and waved it in the light. After sensing it carefully, he confirmed what Baizhenren had said. These primordial lights were the source of the fairy energy. However, the white fireball was too far away from this place, and it would take a very long time to fly there. Moreover, it would take a very long time to absorb enough energy to refine a fairy book from such a long distance. His speed had slowed down, and the speed of these lights seemed to have slowed down as well. Instead, they seemed to be very active, jumping around his fingers like naughty birds, and it was very difficult to catch them. His fingers began to move. Not even their after-images could be seen. They chased and hooked up with those rays of light in an extremely small area. His line of sight, however, remained fixed on a void. That void was not absolute darkness. It was closer to blurry or chaotic. There was no specific color, and it did not even feel like it existed. Logically speaking, unless he found the spell formation of Zhongzhou School, he would not be able to see the scene inside. However, for some reason, when he looked in that direction, the scene in the depths of the void appeared clearly in his mind. He could still see the sea, the peaks of Aoyama, the snowy plains and the tallest icy peak, the few pieces of land and the wild grass far beyond the sea. The scenes changed very quickly. He had turned his head around to take a look when he ascended last time, so he knew that the difference in time between this place and Chaotian was about 1 day, which was equivalent to 1 year. So he was not surprised. Yet, he didn't understand why the fairy lady Byron could communicate with Baizhenren. It was probably because the magic treasure in Zhongzhou School was truly formidable. A wild grass grew under Zhao Lei's feet. In the next moment, wild grass grew out from all the cracks on the black jade plate, connecting to the sky. Bai Zhao woke up in the 3000 nunnery. Looking at the residual sword lights in the blue sky, he remained silent. Chao Yuan returned to the small temple in White Town and sat there for 3 days and 3 nights. Then he turned around and left, beginning his second experience of the mortal world. Zen Master was forced to come back before he could return to the Guocheng Temple. He started playing with the small wooden stick again with a sigh. Bu Qiuxiao started writing books. The first volume recorded the sayings of a student of his, Shiyun. Suzai had gotten rid of the poison caused by the magic pill and obtained a spiritual source from the Kunlun sect. He founded a new sect with the help of the Aoyama sect. Lu Shisui came back from learning the sword work and took Xiao He to travel to the alien land. He encountered Gu Qing and the other two, but he failed to persuade them. By the time he returned to Chaotian, it had been a few decades later. Zhuo Rizhui got what he wanted. He inherited the position of the sect master from Guang Yuanjinren, who was about to stay behind closed doors. Nan Wang and Zhao Liu didn't compete with him for the position. Yuan Chu couldn't defeat him. Gu Qing didn't come back, and it was natural that Lu Shisui would become the sect master of Yamatai in the future. However, as the sect master, he couldn't control anyone. He couldn't even control Ping Yongka's sword peak, to say nothing of Shinma Peak and Qingrong Peak. Fortunately, they were all disciples of the immortal Jingyang, so there was no need for him to control them. If Yuan Chu want to find another place for Shanghai Peak, I wouldn't have any objection. Even if you want to take over Tianguang Peak, would the Master Knight Howler allow me to have any objection? Standing on the top of Tianguang Peak and looking at the peaks in the ocean of clouds, Zhuo Ruzhui tried to console himself. All of a sudden, a spring rain fell down. He couldn't help but sigh. Tianguang Peak was gone, and the stone monument on the back of the round turtle was cracked. There were no more hermit peaks in Aoyama, and the green sky mirror was nowhere to be found. The blue bird was flying all over Chaotian. It was unclear what he was doing or looking at. Over the years, the young sect master of the No Mercy sect had attracted the most attention in Chaotian. Peng Lang had witnessed the all-in-all in sword fight between Jing Jiao and Jian Shilai on that long street, and listened to Jing Jiao's lecture for one night at the 3000 Nunnery. As a result, he had improved a lot. In a few decades, he had reached the highest state of the sword work. Lu Shisui had a duel with him after he came back from overseas and lost badly. As a result, he had no choice but to bring Xiao He back to the 1,000-mile windy corridor to grind the ink for his master. It was unclear who persuaded Peng Lang to go to Aoyama that night, since they only knew that there were barbecued fish and wine by the lakeside and the fairy energy rising in the air. Zhuo Rizhui didn't see Peng Lang, not caring that he would lose face in Aoyama. Anyway, he had stayed behind closed doors as soon as he entered Aoyama, and it was reasonable for him to stay behind closed doors again as soon as he became the sect master. Zhao Liu came out from behind closed doors, but she found that Peng Lang had already left. Peng Lang went to the snowland with Ping Yongka, and a sword Ping Yongka had picked for him from the sword peak. When they arrived at the icy peak, Peng Lang had a duel with the queen of the snowy kingdom and lost badly. Ping Yongka didn't even have the heart to describe what had happened after he returned to Aoyama. Peng Lang stayed in the snowland and didn't come back. Zen Master crawled out from the incense burner table and stepped on the door sill with his bare feet. Looking at the deep part of the snowland, he exclaimed with a slightly changed expression, "Again?" The whole of Chaotian soon learned of the news. The queen was pregnant again. The barbecued fish and wine by the lakeside were, of course, prepared by Hejan. He used the same method that Lien Sanhua had used to persuade Chao Yuan. Bai Zhao had done the same thing. It was Zhao Liu who had persuaded Peng Lang to kill the queen of the Snowy Kingdom. According to her original plan, even if Peng Lang was not a match for the queen of the Snowy Kingdom, he should be able to consume a great deal of her energy. By then, she would be able to kill the queen of the Snowy Kingdom with the fairy energy in her body. Unexpectedly, Peng Lang was defeated so badly, and it was even more unexpected that he had a child with the queen of the Snowy Kingdom. It was impossible for her to kill the queen of the Snowy Kingdom even if she wanted to, and it seemed unnecessary to do so. It was at that moment that she was certain that she couldn't calculate things as well as Jing Jiao, even though Jing Jiao had left decades ago. She went to Penglai Island and didn't care about the affairs of Chaotian anymore. The fishermen and boatmen on the ocean often saw a woman in white walking on the waves on the surface of the ocean after that. People called her the Fairy Lady of Penglai. On the same day that Bai Zhao left, the immortal Tan announced that he would stay behind closed doors, and he passed the position of the sect master to Tong Yin. Tong Yin cooked a table of dishes on the high platform where there was only one tree and nobody else. It was a kind of celebration for her. As the scenes flashed before his eyes, Jing Jiao didn't give any response. He only raised his eyebrows when Peng Lang went to the snowland. The name of the snowy kingdom was indeed problematic. It was the right choice not to change it. His finger suddenly halted. It was during this time that his finger had been capturing the light emitted by the white fireball in the distance without a moment's pause. As his finger halted, the light rays stopped as well. They entangled the fireball and then condensed into a tangible object, exuding an exceedingly faint fairy energy. Jing Jiao hadn't encountered any being in this cold and spacious dark world so far. But it didn't mean that the cultivation practitioners in Chaotian were unnecessarily vigilant. Yet, he still didn't agree with the opinion of the disgraced fairy, Taiping Jinren and Bai Jinren, and he thought Bairan was extremely stupid. Jing Jiao flicked his finger lightly, and the ball of light emitting the fairy energy flew away soundlessly, disappearing into the void. The ball of light drifted down to the sky above Chaotian like a leaf and turned into a fairy book, landing on the sword peak of Aoyama. Ping Yongka walked to the front of the crack between the rocks and took out the fairy book. He lifted his head to take a look at the sky and then waved his hand. He was aware of Jing Jiao's intention. If the amount of energy of heaven and earth was insufficient, and the barrier between Chaotian and the outside world was in danger of dissolving, Jing Jiao would tear the fairy book apart and let the fairy energy in it replenish heaven and earth. This fairy book contained only the fairy energy, but no fairy awareness. Anybody could use it, but now that it was in his hands, nobody could snatch it from him. He had seen Peng Lang and the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom fight, so he knew that they were no match for him. Jing Jiao took a deep look at Chaotian and then left for real. He turned into a flash of sword light and disappeared into the vast universe. For some reason, he didn't take the bamboo chair with him. It didn't take long before a crack appeared in the void. Another ascendant had appeared in Chaotian. The immortal Tan came before the bamboo chair and sat on it, starting to work on his own fairy book. Chapter 757. The immortal Tan sat much longer than Jing Jiao. He didn't leave Chaotian until he was certain that the fairy energy he had collected was equal to the energy of heaven and earth he had brought with him. However, the direction he took was different from Jing Jiao's. In the next moment, Jian Shilai arrived and sat on the bamboo chair. It seemed that the bamboo chair had become a place for the ascendants after they left Chaotian. As soon as Jian Shilai started to forge the ferryman, a black figure as large as a mountain blocked the distant white fireball. The speaker was Chao Yuan. His cultivation state was not inferior to that of the immortal Tan and Jian Shilai, but it was more difficult for him to think it through than anything else. "Do you want to sit down?" Jian Shilai asked. Chao Yuan shook his head while looking at the bamboo chair. There was no heaven and earth in this dark and cold world, and there was no weight. He didn't have to worry about his heavy golden body crushing the bamboo chair. The problem was that he couldn't sit in it. After a long while, they left this place one after the other, heading in a different direction from Jing Jiao and the immortal Tan. There was no heaven and earth in the dark space of the universe. Naturally, there was no up or down, no left or right. There were countless directions. Even if they came from the same place, it was difficult for them to walk the same path. Jing Jiao had his own direction. The universe had no boundaries and no existence. It was extremely empty, but there were still some traces left behind. It was the familiar scent of the fiend prison and the purple flower, in addition to the scent of the sword jail and the Shinma Peak, To put it more precisely, it was the scent of Ada. Only cold cicadas and those mosquitoes could have such a smell. The smell was already very faint, like a drop of ink falling into the sea, but he still caught it, indicating that the snow girl had left from this direction. He didn't have any sensory abilities, nor did he have a sense of smell. This kind of capture was more like a kind of analysis of small things. He was looking for the snow girl because she had uttered a soft "eh" after she had ascended. It was obvious that she had encountered something that surprised even her. Was it possible that she had encountered the rumored heavenly demons of the outside world, the powerful enemies that the cultivation circle in Chaotian had been wary of for many years, and the likes of Taiping Zhenren had come up with the idea of destroying the world? He turned into an inconspicuous glimmer of light in the dark background and headed toward the depths of the distant universe. After an unknown amount of time, he reappeared. Those scents disappeared here, or rather, they were replaced by another scent. The background of the universe was dark. In the distance, there were some indistinct, extremely faint dark patches. One could see a small black dot there, darker than the color of the surroundings. The sword fire illuminated his face, and his eyelashes shimmered. He did not need light to see the object clearly. He ignited the sword fire in order to stop at a faster speed. The flame did not go up, but turned into a fireball. The little black dot grew bigger and bigger, gradually revealing its true appearance, like a black dandelion without a handle. It reminded him of Ada. As he got closer and closer, the black object grew larger and larger, occupying a large part of his field of vision. It was like a small mountain. With the increase in size, anything would appear terrifying. Hence, the weak black dandelion turned into a cold and terrifying black monster. The monster was completely black, with thousands of extremely thin tentacles growing out of its body. There was no wind in the universe, so the tentacles did not flutter. However, they should be soft and could move freely when they were alive. Yes, the black ball-shaped monster with countless tentacles was already dead. Jing Jiao confirmed that there was no trace of activity inside, no fluctuation of aura, and it was extremely cold, even colder than the surrounding universe. He reached out his hand to touch the monster gently. The touch was a bit strange, like a combination of leather and crystals, and it was somewhat disgusting. To his surprise, when he tried to enter the monster's body, he found that the monster's skin was extremely tough, countless times stronger than those of the monsters in the snowy country. He could feel a clear resistance when his fingers opened the monster's skin. If this was the corpse of an extraterrestrial demon, how strong would it have been when it was alive if it could still have such a strong defense after its death? Together with such a huge body, it could easily destroy a sword boat of Aoyama with one strike. Several tentacles left the monster's corpse and slowly floated outward. An enormous crack slowly appeared on the surface of the monster. Jing Jiao flew in and found that it was Midair inside. It looked like a cave full of stalactites. Those stalactites should be the protrusions of the mucous membranes, and those dark and gray bands should be a kind of fascia used to transmit energy. The scene inside the monster's corpse was as disgusting and uncomfortable as the feeling of the skin. Jing Jiao was certain that this peculiar body structure didn't exist in any living being in Chaotian, but he somehow felt a sense of familiarity with it. The monster didn't have a core for transmitting energy. To use the analogy of the humans and the demons, it didn't have a heart. A few cocoon-like objects were suspended in the middle of the monster. It was unclear if they were storage devices or thinking organs. Jing Jiao flew around the monster's body at a high speed and memorized all the shapes and distribution of the objects. Then he came to the front of a few cocoon-like objects. The surface of the cocoons was covered with a layer of frost, indicating that this was the only place in the monster's body that had something similar to water. Jing Jiao reached out his finger and touched one of the cocoons lightly. He felt a tingling sensation, but he wasn't sure what kind of energy it was. Without a sound, the cocoon-like object disintegrated, turning into countless ice crystals that slowly floated in all directions. Jing Jiao had guessed that this was the work of the snow girl. He merely wanted to confirm it. He flew out of the monster's corpse and flew a few miles away before he turned around to take a look. The broken ice crystals of the cocoon-like objects had already touched the inner wall of the monster's corpse. The black monster quivered slightly, thousands of tentacles on its surface waving slowly. The black monster turned back into a black dandelion without a handle, as if it were drifting in the wind. Jingjiu had the familiar feeling again. The fiend prison and Ada were nowhere to be found in the quiet space of the universe. The snow girl had become more cautious after killing the black monster. She must have put away Cold Cicada. Where should Jingjiu go now? If the black dandelion-like monster was the heavenly demon of the outside world as imagined by the cultivation practitioners, there would be more than one of them. Jingjiu lifted his finger and sniffed the gray ice crystal on the tip of his finger, and then headed toward the source of the smell. As he flew, he encountered a few more black dandelion-like monsters, and was increasingly convinced that they were the so-called heavenly demons of the outside world. Those heavenly demons of the outside world had all turned into cold corpses. Jingjiu knew that he was heading in the right direction, and that the snow girl was heading in this direction. As such, he sped up. After flying for a long while, Jingjiu suddenly thought of something, and turned his head to look at the white fireball. The white fireball had become very small, exuding a tranquil and dim glow in the distant dark space. Jingjiu thought that this was the star. Jingjiu turned around and continued flying forward. There was another star waiting for him in front of him. The star grew larger and larger and turned into another sun. This sun was a red fireball, very large, with some tongues of fire coming out from its surface. He didn't have time to appreciate this magnificent scene before it disappeared. A huge shadow blocked the fireball. It was the same as when the dead dog used his body to block the sun in the sky. There were hundreds of thousands of thin tentacles on the surface of the shadow. Judging from the shape, it looked like those monsters he had seen along the way, exuding a very cold and dreadful energy, giving off a feeling that it could swallow everything. Jingjiu sensed a strong sense of danger. This heavenly demon of the outside world was hundreds of times larger than the ones he had seen before. The worst part was that those tentacles were drifting slowly, like the wild grass at the bottom of the water. It was because this demon of the outside world was alive. A powerful energy wave came out from the shadow, heading toward various places in the universe. It was evident that the demon was searching for something. The energy wave would soon arrive at the space where Jingjiu was. Jingjiu had thought of many things in a short time. This heavenly demon of the outside world must have come here for his deceased subordinates or descendants, so it must be much stronger. Judging from the time, the snow girl should have left not long ago. Given her temperament, there was only one possibility that she hadn't killed this heavenly demon of the outside world. She wasn't sure that she could kill it. Where should Jingjiu flee to then? As Jingjiu was thinking of all this, the energy wave of the heavenly demon of the outside world had already swept over the space where he was. Jingjiu didn't show any fear. He looked at the huge black dandelion 100 miles away in silence. While flying in the universe, he could see some meteorites once in a while, especially when he was close to the red fireball in front of him. The number of meteorites increased. At the moment, he had no breath, no temperature, no heartbeat, no energy, and nothing at all. It was believed that a life form in a higher state wouldn't be able to distinguish him from a meteorite. Back when he participated in the cultivation tournament of the Plum Meeting, his cultivation state was still very low, but he was able to kill a great many monsters of the Snowy Kingdom in one night. As expected, the energy wave of the heavenly demon of the outside world didn't linger after sweeping over the space where he was, heading to another place. It was time for Jingjiu to leave, but he suddenly thought of something. This place was very far away from Chaotian, but it was still possible for this life form of the heavenly demon of the outside world to find the place by following the tracks. The white fireball was the nearest star to this place. Looking at the heavenly demon of the outside world, Jingjiu raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. No sound could be heard in the dark space. Yet, a ball of sword fire lit up on the tip of his finger. The fireball was very eye-catching. It looked like a star. Chapter 758. In a vast and boundless universe, the ball of sword flames on Jing Jio's fingertips was as small and indistinct as a firefly, but it was still very eye-catching. That huge shadow sensed it in an instant, and the intense waves swept back at an unimaginable speed, ascertaining Jing Jio's existence and location. Countless tentacles started to wriggle, and under the illumination of the red fireball behind it, they gave off an extremely evil feeling. At the sight of this, Jing Jiu once again felt a sense of familiarity, but he couldn't recall where he had seen it before. Just when he was about to slice off those ugly and obviously dangerous tentacles, the intense waves seemed to have turned into some kind of invisible force field, causing the entire space to become viscous. He couldn't even move his body, let alone swing his sword light. Jing Jiu knew that he had made a mistake. He had underestimated the opponent's power, or rather, he hadn't taken into account the opponent's battle style. It was obvious that the heavenly demon was not planning to capture him, but to destroy him directly. An evil and powerful consciousness landed on Jing Jiu's body, grabbing hold of his divine soul. If his divine soul were a tangible object, it would have been covered in a thick layer of frost and would be torn into shreds by that consciousness at the next moment. If it were any other human ascendant, they wouldn't be able to resist this extremely powerful spiritual consciousness at this moment. However, Jing Jiu had once experienced an even more powerful spiritual consciousness. Moreover, his divine soul had gone through 2 reincarnations, making it many times tougher than other ascendants. Not only was he not killed by the evil consciousness of the heavenly demon, he even launched a counterattack. 2 extremely bright sword lights appeared in the depths of his eyes, like fish leaping out of the sea, illuminating his eyelashes and everything in front of him. The universe was still deathly still, but there seemed to be a deafening boom ringing out from somewhere. The heavenly demon trembled slightly, and the countless tentacles on the surface of its body started to tremble at an even faster speed, giving off a great deal of smoke and dust. It looked like a mist of spores shot out from a mushroom. That evil and terrifying consciousness retreated, and the intense waves also disappeared without a trace. The space that seemed to have become viscous returned to normal, and Jing Jiu was able to move again. He could not use the all in creation sword formation here. With his opponent's defense and huge body, it would be hard for him to cause any real damage even if he used his sword light to slash at him from a distance. How should he fight? A streak of sword light flew into the huge shadow. That shadow was illuminated from time to time, and a certain part of its skin would occasionally turn transparent. One could vaguely see Jing Jiu flying at top speed inside. Countless tentacles fell off, silently bursting into sparks in the dark universe. That evil and powerful consciousness was still chasing after him coldly, without any feeling of surprise or fear. That tranquil and awe-inspiring sword intent seemed to vanish from time to time, but it would always reappear. Not long after, everything became still. The tentacles stopped moving and floated around like seaweed. The extraterrestrial demon also stopped moving. Silent, it floated in the universe. Suddenly, it shuddered. The otherworldly demon turned into countless fragments and scattered in all directions, no longer having any aura. The evil and powerful consciousness also disappeared. Dust floated in the universe, moving away in all directions. It looked like a scene from the ancient times. Looking at the fragments of the corpses of the otherworldly demon flying away with him as the center, Jing Jiu showed a tired expression on his pale face. His white cloth was torn to shreds, and the fragments flew away. His body was full of wounds with gray energy, and his sword source was almost exhausted. The most troublesome part was that his sword awareness had been damaged too much by that evil consciousness. He felt dizzy at the moment, and he could fall asleep or die at any moment. This was his first fight after his ascension. It didn't take long, and it was soundless, but it was more difficult than any fight he had fought in Chaotian. This was also the closest he had been to death in both of his lives. It was because his opponent was truly powerful, and he had made two wrong judgments. When he examined the first corpse of the otherworldly demon, he found that the cocoon-like object in his body was the place where the energy was stored. The energy was frozen into ice cubes by the snow girl. He was not sure if it was the same as the fairy energy or the energy of heaven and earth, but he thought it should be usable. The snow girl didn't need any replenishment when flying in the extremely cold universe, but Jingjio didn't. According to his original calculation, he would use the energy in the cocoon-like object to replenish his energy after he killed the otherworldly demon. What he didn't expect was that this extraterrestrial demon would choose to self-destruct before it was certain to die. Those cocoon-like objects turned into the light and heat in the universe, but they did more harm to the otherworldly demon. You didn't even predict this. A voice rang out in Jingjio's sea of awareness. A band of green smoke drifted out from his body. It didn't disperse, but gradually twisted and deformed until it turned into a small person. The small person wore a green cloth, with a handsome face and an amiable smile. He was none other than Taiping Jinren. A stick of incense had been burning in the ancestral hall of the Zhang Manor in the Green Sky Mirror, but nobody knew what it was for. Jingjio went to the Green Sky Mirror a few days ago. He didn't take the incense with him, but he took the smoke with him. Jingjio glanced at Taiping Jinren and asked, "Why did you come out?" Taiping Jinren said, while staring at Jingjio's eyes, "Your sword discernment was damaged badly, and your Dao heart couldn't be protected. So I came out." Jingju said in his mind, "I didn't expect that he wasn't afraid of death, and it seemed that he wanted to die." Taiping Jinren let out a faint mocking smile. "You have lived two lives. Haven't you seen those so-called righteous swordsmen who sought their own deaths?" Jingjio shook his head. Those people knew that they would die for sure, so they wanted to live a happy and peaceful life. But this otherworldly demon is exceedingly powerful. I think he can live for many years, even as long as the round turtle. But why doesn't he fear death? Why does he seek death? The otherworldly demon had misjudged his mental energy, and he had also misjudged his opponent's cruel will. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been wounded so badly. Taiping Jinren said thoughtfully, "Maybe this is why they are called otherworldly demons. But I've proven that I'm right." Looking at the small person formed by the green smoke, Jingjio said, "So many people have followed you, but it looks like they have all died in vain." He had repaired the barrier of Chaotian while sitting on the bamboo chair, and killed so many otherworldly demons with the snow girl. Taiping Jinren had witnessed all of this. To put it more precisely, the purpose of Jingjio's ascension was to let him witness all of this. This world was colder and more bizarre than he had imagined, and it was indeed dangerous. But it seemed that it was not impossible to resist. Many people in Chaotian, including Bai Zhenren, Monk Duhai, and the elders of various sects, had embarked on a path of no return because they believed in his opinion. From the looks of it now, was it really all wrong? Taiping Jinren shot him a glance. "Haven't you found that you've become much weaker? It means that this world is of a lower level," said Jingjio calmly. "Unfortunately, you're going to die," said Taiping Jinren with a faint smile. The red fireball was too far away from here, so it was hard to replenish the fairy energy and heal the wound in his body through it. "I can sleep here for a few hundred more years." "What is a year?" Taiping Jinren's green cloth suddenly drifted up, and the rims of his cloth turned into green smoke again. Jingjio guessed what he intended to do, the expression in his eyes turning cold. "It's not necessary. You can live for a few more years." "What is a year, then?" The rims of his cloth tousled again, and the green smoke was moving. Taiping Jinren reached out his hands and pushed him gently toward the red fireball. After a long while, the immortal Taiping came to a halt. His body from the waist down had almost turned invisible. The flames spat out by the red fireball looked more real here, and he could sense them more clearly. They were indeed the fairy energy. At this distance, he would be able to recover with only 3,000 thoughts. Taipingzhiren was right. In this universe that was as silent as a huge tomb, there was no such thing as a year. There was only thought. Jing Jiu's sword awareness had calmed down, and he felt tired. As he was about to enter the trance, he said to Taipingzhiren, "Big brother, goodbye." The green smoke was a sliver of Taipingzhiren's spiritual soul, which couldn't be resurrected. It could be kept for about 10 years in all in one sword and the green sky mirror. It was impossible for him to live any longer. Taipingzhiren let out a smile. He suddenly sensed something and looked at a spot in the universe. "It's so beautiful," he murmured absent-mindedly for a moment. Jingjiu also looked in the same direction, saying, "Yeah, it's a worthwhile trip." Seeing this spectacular scene, Taipingzhiren felt sentimental, and then his thoughts dissipated. Jingjiu fell into a deep sleep. There were innumerable stars in the universe. Tens of thousands of burning flying swords were flying among them. In a short time, those burning flying swords had arrived in front of the red fireball and surrounded the two brothers. The flying swords halted, and the flames retracted to their tails, revealing their true appearances. Each flying sword was a battleship about 5 miles long, covered with a grayish-white metal, but not reflecting much light. Tens of thousands of flying swords were equivalent to tens of thousands of battleships. At the end of the 7th book, Taiping has seen it. He has seen the battleship. I must let you know this. There's a short speech at the end. Chapter 759. 2,000,000 Words, Jing Jiu's Ascension. I followed the rhythm of the book perfectly when I started it the year before last. I wanted to write a long speech to talk about this story, but the chapter tomorrow was too interesting, so I didn't have much to say about writing. Let me say a few words. The first part of the way toward heaven was what I imagined cultivation to be. My goal is to write as light as possible. Looking back, although there were still a lot of pretentious parts that could not be completely erased, it was basically bland enough. Many readers responded that it was interesting to read along, but they often forgot the characters and events that appeared before. Not to mention you, when I wrote about those people and events, I felt that they were so strange. I confidently said that I did it on purpose, and this was the effect that I was after. There is no need to add a dog's head here, because this is the pursuit. One should be brave and not shy to admit that one still has a pursuit. Cultivators have a different sense of time from mortals. In a blink of an eye, it was 4 seasons, years, decades, and a sleep was 100 years. To them, it was just a matter of closing and opening their eyes. But to us, who lived next to the Jing residence and the Net Perception Temple for 100 years, it should be like a lifetime. Let's talk about our Jing Jiu. Many people felt that his face was too blurry, that he was too cold, and that his character was too cold. His face was blurry because he was too beautiful. Words could not describe him, including my words. Here is a dog's head. Some of the reasons why he was like this were already explained in the book. I still like my way of writing. Echo. Just like the previous stories, this story was still sending people away. Lucy I, March, Yuan Qijing, and even Taipingzhiren just now. The biggest difference between this story and the stories of the spy and choosing heaven was Jing Jiu's attitude. He really didn't like it, disagreed, and couldn't accept it. Until now, he was angry when he saw the spring rain and sad when he saw the morning light, but he couldn't cry. Jing Jiu's pursuit of living was, of course, based on my fear of death, but there was a better reason. That reason was mentioned earlier, and at the end of the book, there would be a dialogue to continue the topic. Of course, I have to write about ascending to become an immortal, but how to write about it after ascending has always been a problem. When I first opened the book, I said, "I'm not afraid." His tone was probably the same as when Bursaw said those 3 words when he was threatened by the Axe Gang's fake big brother. In writing, there are always 2 problems that are difficult to solve after ascension. The first is the worry of repetition, which I can solve. Secondly, I would be cut off from my previous world. This was something that would never happen in my mind. So what was there to worry about? It's just that the following story is going to be a little strange. I'm not saying that I'm creative. I'm really sorry, but I really don't have the ability in this area. I can only try to fill the old bottle with some delicious new wine. Taiping Jinren and the great ancestor of the mysterious dark sect loved to drink wormwood because I really liked it during that period of time. I have to warn you in advance. Readers who like pure immortal cultivation could just read this. Honestly speaking, if the first 2 million words of The Great Way Toward Heaven were taken out, he believed that it would also be a very good immortal cultivation book. I will write the last 1 million words of The Way Toward Heaven according to my original idea. I will write it very seriously, paying attention to the details, interesting, tongue-in-cheek, new and old. Now it seems that this is really the last 1 million words of my last super long novel. Let me be presumptuous for a while. Whether it's writing or reading stories, we need to spend time, and you also need to spend money. Let me try my best to make this trip worthwhile for everyone. Just like how Taiping Jinren saw tens of thousands of warships. Chapter 760. You don't know what's the point of that. Once it starts, it can't be repeated. The circles spread again, and again the scenery is like a fish swimming. You might be another you when the butterflies explode like metal, burn, and die one by one. Only traces of you are left in the places you see. Excerpt from Zhang Zhao's October Water. Tens of thousands of warships ignited once more, turning into tens of thousands of burning flying swords that flew into the depths of the distant universe. Those flames that glowed with a dark blue luster were not the burning of real things, but more like some kind of light stream. It didn't take long for those burning flying swords to disappear without a trace, and no one knew where they went. There was nothing around the enormous red fireball other than the extraterrestrial demon's corpse and dust. Mother Nest. That's a real mother nest. Its defense is extremely strong, and the intensity of its pulse attack can even penetrate the thickest alloy plate. It would take at least a B squadron to destroy it. I don't believe it can be killed by a single person. I've said many times he's a liquid metal robot, not a real human. I've also said many times that it's impossible. Spectral analysis shows that his body isn't metal at all, but is composed of an unknown element. Also, look at his skin and hair. We're going to be such a good bionic material. The biggest logical problem is that if he's a liquid metal robot, why would he imitate the appearance and internal organs of a human? This doesn't make sense. Also, where's his microprocessor? You've already scanned him more than 700 times. Have you seen a processor or a message channel? After receiving the information, the Academy of Science believes that he's very likely a remnant of an ancient civilization. Please, how many years has it been since the ancient civilization was destroyed? Even if our ancestors once reached this level of civilization, how could they have preserved a robot in such good condition? The blue sky scattered evenly light outside the window, giving off an unreal feeling, but it was enough to illuminate the spacious laboratory very brightly. Two scientists stood outside the transparent protective cover, looking inside and arguing about something. After who knew how long, the male scientist suddenly said, "Did the last request come through?" They had tried all types of cutting tools in the planetary base, but the experimental target's body was extremely dense and hard, and they couldn't take samples at all. They had no choice but to report to the Academy of Science, hoping that they could transfer a dynamic field separator over. The reason they had no choice was because the Academy of Science would definitely agree to their request, but there would definitely be many other colleagues coming with the dynamic field separator. Faced with such an amazing discovery, no scientist was willing to miss it. The slightly older and gentle-looking female scientist shook her head and gave an unexpected answer. The director was worried that the internal structure of the experimental target would be damaged, so he rejected the application. But don't be too happy too early. The director will come over in a spaceship, and it might take another 20 days. The male scientist sighed. It was unknown whether it was regret or fear. He looked at the experimental target on the stage and said, "To be honest, I don't even have the heart to cut off a strand of his hair." The female scientist was puzzled and asked, "What do you mean? This is a work of art." The male scientist withdrew his gaze and looked at her seriously. This is the most perfect work of art in the universe. Even the tiniest damage to it, even cutting off its fingernails, is a crime. The female scientist looked at the experiment target for a long time and silently agreed with her partner's opinion. She said, "Therefore, he can't be a human. Even if he were to undergo the most expensive gene optimization 10 times and receive the blessing of the priestess, he can't be so perfect. He is the most perfect work of art, but he is not perfect. True perfection is actually incomplete." The most precise scan revealed a very small fine line at the corner of his eye, probably at the atomic level. You have no idea how beautiful that fine line is under the lens of an electron microscope. The male scientist couldn't help but fix his gaze on the stage again as he talked incessantly. "If he were a living person, I would fall in love with him hopelessly," he said sentimentally. The female scientist said, "No matter from which angle, he should be a man if he were alive." The male scientist shrugged and asked innocently, "Is it important?" The metal was everywhere in the laboratory. The metal looked white under the warm sunlight from the blue sky outside the window, but didn't feel cold at all. There was a metal platform in the middle of the transparent protective shield, on which a naked man lay. Both his face and body were perfect. The man suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the two scientists outside the protective shield, exclaiming emotionlessly, "Hmm?" The meditation room at the New Era Institute was as quiet as its name suggested. A dozen students sat on the floor with their eyes closed, remaining motionless for a long time, but their eyelids were quivering slightly. It was evident that their eyeballs were rolling around once in a while, as if they were reading something. After a long while, a student opened his eyes and fell backward on the floor, feeling bored. "If it weren't Zone Leesy's book, I wouldn't be able to continue reading it," he said while crossing his legs. Another student opened his eyes and said while rubbing his sore neck, "Well, she can write 100,000 words a day. She should be able to read enough." The first student snorted and said, "I can write 600,000 words a day if I use my awareness to capture them. She doesn't have a single wrong word or colloquial expression, and there is no trace of artificial modification. It's evident that she has used manual input." More students opened their eyes in succession and joined the discussion. "She can write 100,000 words by manual input? When did she break through the cultivation state? It's not right. Even if her cultivation state had improved by 3 levels, the speed of her hands shouldn't be so fast. Her family isn't in a good condition. Maybe she's in a hurry to make money. Otherwise, her hair wouldn't have turned white at such a young age. She and I are classmates in the elementary class. It's said that she encountered a problem during the second gene development. That's a bit of stretch. The key is the content of the story, not to mention writing 100,000 words a day. What era is it now? They are still writing about cultivation. It's really old-fashioned and boring, just like the title of the book. That's right. The name The Path Toward Heaven is too common. The title and plot of the book are not so bad. The giant is quite adorable, Sure Sui is quite lovable, and Tong Yin is so pitiful. But the main character is too boring. He has a straight face all day long, and his character is flat and devoid of character. A young girl walked into the meditation room along with a crisp shout and the sound of the door slamming. The young girl was about 15 or 16 years old, wearing a plain Taoist robe. Her silvery hair was tied up behind her back, looking rather valiant. She yelled angrily at her classmates. "Cultivation is not old-fashioned at all. It's not old-fashioned at all. 100,000 words aren't enough to shut your mouths. And you, what do you mean by devoid of character? You can read the rest of the story. You will give an explanation, and the explanation is very good. I've almost cried after reading it." A student couldn't help but remark, "But the story is easy to forget the beginning when you read the rest of the story. It's useless no matter how good your explanation is." The silver-haired girl Zone Leezy walked on the small path of the campus, feeling a bit dejected. Her Taoist robe, tousling in the wind, looked less energetic. As she came to the edge of the cliff at the end of the small path, she lifted her head to look at the stars rotating at a high speed in the night sky and the high platforms hidden in the clouds and fog. a look of admiration and yearning showing on her small face. After a long while, her yearning and admiration turned into tiredness and helplessness. She jumped off the cliff, her Taoist robe tousled by the wind, turning into a dandelion. After drifting for a long time, the light in the sky had gradually dimmed, and her speed had gradually slowed down. She landed on the ground. In comparison to the cliffs where the Institute was located and the other worlds hidden in the clouds and fog, the world here was always gray and gloomy, and the lights in the buildings were very dim. Fortunately, it was not as wet, dirty, and dangerous as described in the movies of the last days. Zhong Lizi walked into an ordinary apartment building and returned to her home after being scanned. She took a cup of water and drank it all in one gulp. Then she collapsed on the sofa. Looking at the closed door of her bedroom and thinking of the comments of her classmates, she couldn't help but yell angrily. Everybody says that it's not interesting. Even if you spend money to buy the right to publish it on the internet, you still can't make money. Don't expect me to pay for it. No response could be heard in the bedroom. It was as quiet as ever, as if nobody was inside. She walked to the front of the door and knocked on it twice forcefully, saying the website of the Institute has updated that Tong Yin went to see Jing Jiao and Lu Xi and asked them to steal the green sky mirror, but the response is still mediocre. What should we do next? I've read the rest of what you've written, and there's no loophole in it. Even the three sages felt sad when they died, but they didn't cry happily. The last part of their ascension is so dull. Your writing is not good enough. You have to write it more carefully after your ascension. The door was still closed, and the person inside didn't heed her. Zhong Lizi couldn't help but open the door forcefully. A youth wearing a tracksuit and a hat sat by the window, looking at something. She thought he was indeed a strange person who wore a hat at home. I'm asking you. Tell me where he went after his ascension, she demanded. The youth answered after a moment of silence. He came to this world. Hearing this answer, Zhong Lizi was taken aback for a moment, and then screamed while holding her head. What the hell are you talking about? Nobody will read it if you do. Do you think it's something new to link the cultivation world with the interstellar age? Many people have written about it. This kind of combination of subjects is the worst choice. It's like a deformed freak. How dare you write it like that? I don't care. You have to change it for me. Having said that, she slammed the door shut. The youth didn't heed her reaction. He was still looking at the outside of the window in silence. This place was very low and far from the starry sky, so he could only see a tiny corner of the universe. The starlight shining through the window was even more feeble. The starlight shone on his face, making it look even more beautiful. It had been 1,600,000 breaths since Jing Jiao came to this world. Based on the time here, it should be 20 days. He hadn't figured out what was going on yet. The only thing he was certain of was that this was a low-level civilization compared to Chaotian. However, he had learned the word civilization only after he came here. Chapter 761. Jing Jiao pulled back his gaze from the space, turned around, opened the door, and walked into the living room. He took off the hat and sat on the cushioned chair. The civilization in this world was indeed at a low level, but it had its merits. For instance, this chair was more comfortable than his bamboo chair. Zhong Lizi was combing her silvery long hair with a comb in her hand. She was angry when she saw Jing Jiao walk out of the living room as if nothing had happened. As she was about to mock him, she suddenly lost her temper when she saw his face after he took off the hat, and her voice grew much gentler. Is it time? Speaking of which, why are you so interested in the news? Did you come from the upper world? Were you harmed by your stepmother? She had no resistance against his handsome face. Otherwise, she wouldn't have accepted his request to rent the house together a few days ago. It was well known that he didn't have any proof of his identity. Yet, she was not afraid that he would do anything to her. This youth was truly good-looking. He had many ways to make money or to go to the upper echelons of the Cloud City to get to know those important figures. As the saying goes, taking advantage of one's handsome appearance to commit murder. There was no need to resort to violence. The main reason was that she was a student of the New Era Institute and possessed a fighting prowess superior to a regular person. As such, it was impossible for this youth to be her equal. However, it was also because of his handsome face that she was deceived by him and agreed to upload the article to the Institute network in her own name. Unexpectedly, she got such a terrible review. The humans are not as powerful as those of the distant ancient civilization, but everybody can cultivate Jinchi after they have mastered the method of modifying their genes. As such, the traditional cultivation method you wrote about is hardly attractive to the readers. She looked at Jingjiu and advised him earnestly. It's like the swordsmen in the Broken Sea state in your book. They sound powerful and intimidating, but their flying swords are so slow that they can't even catch up with the battleships. How can they fight against them? Even if they are more powerful than the human swordsmen, they are not that powerful. It's impossible for the readers to have such a strong emotional impact on them. Unless the cultivation practitioners in your book can destroy a permanent star with one punch. Jingjiu knew what a permanent star was by now, saying nobody can do that. He couldn't destroy a permanent star in his cultivation state, and the other cultivation practitioners in Chaotian couldn't either, to say nothing of this low-level civilization. It said that there is a powerful weapon of the stellar state. Zhong Lizi whispered to his ear in a hushed voice. It could destroy a permanent star. The problem is that it can't gather enough energy. It said that it's a weapon of the stellar state. Jingjiu thought that was a meaningless sentence. If there was a magic treasure that could absorb all the immortal qi in the burning fireball, why would they destroy it? Suddenly, there was music. He knew that it would start in a minute. He sat up straight on the cushion and looked at the screen in front of him. Every night at 8 o'clock, the light screen would broadcast something called the news, which would tell the important things that had happened in this world. Although he did not understand why they were doing this for a foreigner like him, this was an important source of information to understand this world, and he did not want to miss it. Zhong Lizi poured herself a cup of water and took some pills. She took a portion of cellulose and finished the dinner after a few mouthfuls. Should we modify the content of the Before the Ascension? It hasn't been updated yet. Let's intensify the conflict between the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school and create some other grudges. For instance, did anything happen between Bai Zhenren and Lu Ci back then? And how did they become estranged later? Or the relationship between Zhao Liu and Bai Zhao? Jingjiu thought that Gu Qing had done so much already. Was it still not enough? He had written the book, The Path Toward Heaven, for a profound reason. He had to let as many people read it as possible, so he had no choice but to publish it through this little girl. However, he still felt annoyed when she talked about it too much. He turned to the girl with silvery hair, intending to say something, but he didn't say anything in the end. They were, after all, from a low-level civilization. What more could he ask of them? Being stared at by Jingjiu in such a manner, Zhong Lizi couldn't help but feel a bit embarrassed. The Jingjiu in the book is you, she said softly. You're really narcissistic, but you're really good-looking. How old are you? The news had already started. Jingjiu paid no more attention to her, looking at the light screen. Looking at Jingjiu's upright sitting posture and focused expression, Zhong Lizi felt bored. Only the most ambitious students and the most enthusiastic populace would watch the news every night. Who in the civilian district would watch it? This youth was indeed a strange person. Perhaps he was a member of the upper echelons. The scene on the news changed a few times, and then it showed a large metal door where the reporter was interviewing an official. The official said that the explosion a few days ago was an accident, but it was brought under control in time. It had no effect on the environment or the structure of the building, so the populace didn't need to panic. Jingjiu felt surprised. According to the knowledge he had learned in the last few days, the imperial court or the plum meeting should have issued an arrest warrant a long time ago. But why hadn't he seen his face, which could be easily recognized on the news? Was it because the place called the laboratory was not that important? At the end of the news, Jingjiu saw a man in the distance in the background. The man had a messy golden hair and an ordinary face, but he left a deep impression on Jingjio. Before Jingjio opened his eyes in the laboratory, he heard a conversation. He had never heard of this language, but it was strange that he could understand the meaning of the conversation. A man expressed his love for him, and he didn't care about his gender. Jingjio opened his eyes and saw the man. The man had blonde hair and an ordinary face. He was wearing a white coat. Jingjio uttered reflexively to express his doubt, but he thought it was impolite to do so. As such, he stood up from the table and nodded to the other party to express his gratitude. This kind of thing was not uncommon in Chaotian, and it was even popular in the Dongyi Dao for a while. Though he didn't need to be polite when he was in Chaotian, he thought he should keep a low profile since he was in the rumored fairy world. The two scientists were the figures in the upper echelons of this world, and they had seen a great deal of dust in the Milky Way and many other strange things. As such, they didn't scream when Jingjio woke up. Yet, they were still surprised, staring at Jingjio without blinking their eyes. Jingjio forgot that he wasn't wearing any clothes, just like when he was in the fiend prison. He scanned the surroundings with the piercing discernment and learned the environment and all the details of this place in a short time, including the details hidden behind the metal walls. This room was a bit smaller than the Manor Cave on Shima Peak, but it was very organized, giving off a simple and boring sense of beauty, or in other words, a sense of boredom. What interested him was that he could see nothing but metal. It seemed that the minerals in the fairy world were much more abundant than those in Chaotian. As for those glowing and complicated magic treasures, they were similar to those of the equipment refining sect, except that the crystals inside them were too small and the energy inside them was not pure. On the contrary, the energy in the thread-like magic treasures hidden behind the walls was very pure, but the amount was not enough. What disappointed him the most was that the magic treasures and the fake light sources outside the window indicated that the fairy energy was used indirectly in this world. To some extent, this world was not as good as those in the alien lands of his former world. Was this really the fairy world? How could it be so backward? Jingjio had come to a conclusion in a short time. He recovered his composure and looked at the two of them. He noticed that they were looking at him as if they were paying him a salary, and he found that he wasn't wearing any clothes. The white cloth was destroyed after the dreadful battle with the heavenly demons of the outside world, and he had lost the connection with that space after he left Chaotian, so he couldn't bring those clothes with him. Otherwise, he would have taken the bamboo chair with him. As a cultivation practitioner, he didn't care about such things. He raised his hands and was about to bow to the other party. Unexpectedly, the other party was startled and yelled after taking a few steps back. Though he had never heard that language before, he could understand what they meant. Put your hands down. There is an energy field of the 6th level here. Even the main guns of the battleships can't break it. After a moment of silence, Jingjio pulled back his hands and took a few steps forward. As expected, he encountered an invisible barrier. What was the meaning of the energy field? It was hard to imagine that he hadn't discovered this invisible barrier. The biggest question was, why was there such an invisible barrier? Were these people going to imprison him? Jingjio raised his right hand again and pressed on the invisible barrier. Countless sword lights appeared between his palm and the air, illuminating his expressionless face. Chapter 762. As soon as Jingjio raised his right hand, the two scientists yelled nervously. Stop! Don't try! Are you crazy? Even if you're the most powerful liquid metal robot, it's impossible for you to break through the force field. You'll get hurt. Jingjio understood what the two of them were talking about, but he didn't quite understand what they meant. What was the force field? What did it have to do with the energy field mentioned earlier? What was a robot? Was it impossible to break through the force field? What did it mean? As soon as he woke up, he used the piercing discernment to observe his body and ascertain that the fairy energy in his body had recovered somewhat. He didn't have a match in Chaotian, so how could a magic treasure in this backward place block him? Pa, 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 pa. Countless crisp sounds echoed in the spacious laboratory. Hundreds of sword lights came out from his palm and the air, and then they circled around at a high speed and returned to his side. He didn't manage to break through this invisible barrier. Sensing the distorted space around him, Jingzhou wondered if this was the so-called energy field or force field. There was no magic treasure in Chaotian that could completely alter the structure of the space. This fairy world was a bit backward, but it was interesting. Jingzhou took 2 steps back and looked at the metal walls, a sword light beaming in the deep end of his eyes. Soon, he found the weak spot among the thousands of magic treasures and the flow of yuanqi behind the metal walls, as well as the center. His finger shot out, and an extremely cold sword light shot toward the metal walls, but it was blocked by the invisible barrier halfway. The sword light turned back and landed on Jingzhou's body. This invisible barrier could block the all-in-one sword, and it could also block the insubstantial sword light. The expression on Jingzhou's face grew more serious. Seeing the sword lights dancing around the high platform and the sword light wielded by Jingzhou in the end, the male scientist squatted down by the instrument table and held his head in his hands, yelling in surprise. What is this? Is it the third form of the condensed light? Is this a personal laser weapon? When he saw the sword light bounce back to Jingzhou's body by the energy field, he was even more shocked, yelling nervously while waving his arms. Be careful. Be careful. Don't hurt yourself. The female scientist tried her best to speak in a calm tone. Please calm down. We should talk. We mean you no harm. Don't try anymore. No one can break through the energy field. You will only hurt yourself. Jingzhou could understand their language, but he couldn't speak it. That was not why he refused to talk. The real reason was that the invisible barrier was blocking his way, like a fence. This was a cell, and he was a prisoner. Negotiating while in captivity was something he could not accept. He looked at the 2 scientists. Their gazes met. The male scientist's eyes became a little blurred, and the female scientist's breathing became a little heavy. She suddenly turned around and walked to the control panel. They weren't seduced by Jingzhou's beauty, but a powerful will had appeared in their spiritual world, and they couldn't resist it. The invisible barrier called the energy field could distort space and block matter and sword light, but consciousness could pass through it. Jingzhou ordered the 2 men to let go of him, but found that this kind of mental control could not be achieved with absolute precision. The 2 scientists sat in front of the control panel with blank expressions. They didn't know what to do, and their fingers moved aimlessly. In the distance, someone was walking over. It was probably the thing called the energy field that had attracted their attention. Jingzhou looked at the control panel behind the wall that he had discovered earlier, and once again transmitted his will to the 2 people. A light blue barrier appeared and then disappeared. The invisible barrier had been removed. When Jingzhou left, he thought of something. He turned around and walked to the side of the 2 unconscious people. After some thought, he took off the female's coat and put it on himself. These clothes were naturally not as good as the dozen or so white clothes in the Shima Peak cave abode. Fortunately, they were still white, and women's clothes were always cleaner. Outside was an even larger space. It was unknown how many floors there were, and there were countless open and dark passageways passing through it. From the walls to the floor to the ventilation pipes, most of the things here were made of metal. Jingzhou once again confirmed that this was a world rich in mineral resources. It was difficult to walk on the metal floor without making a sound. During this period of time, he heard the footsteps of at least 10 people coming from all directions. He didn't make any sound, and he wasn't worried about being discovered by anyone. How could the people here do something that even the extraterrestrial demons couldn't do? He walked in a very long passageway. The light shining down from above was very natural, and it was a little dim. Naturally, he thought of the passageway that led to his senior brother's cell under the sword jail in Aoyama. Suddenly, he sensed 2 aura waves sweeping toward him at high speed from both ends of the passageway. In the universe, he could disguise himself as a meteorite, but what could he disguise himself as here? A waste paper basket? Or should he turn into a butterfly and fly away? Just when the 2 aura waves were about to land on him, he turned into a beam of sword light and flashed to the right. Without a sound, an extremely small but sharp crack appeared on the incomparably hard metal wall. On the other end of the metal wall was a small room. There were some cups and other things that he didn't recognize. Judging from the hidden energy waves of those things, they should be some kind of magic treasures. The door was pushed open, and two men in white clothes walked in. They were slightly startled when they saw him, and after nodding to express their greetings, they started to do their own things. It seemed that the white clothes were what they used to identify each other. Jingjiu thought that it was probably similar to the clothing of those sects in the world of cultivation, such as the sword robes of the Aoyama sect. With a light drip, the boiling water was poured into the cup, giving off a faint aroma of tea. Jingjiu actually didn't have a sense of smell, but he could analyze the minute differences in the aroma. He was sure that the tea made by this magic treasure was 33,000 times worse than the tea made by Guqing. What surprised him was that the way the magic treasure converted spiritual energy was very ingenious. It boiled water much faster than the silver charcoal stove and iron kettle on the Shima Peak. A man picked up a cup of tea and asked, "Would you like a cup?" Jingjiu noticed that this man was wearing a metal ring on his hand. The other man also had one on his hand. Thinking that the two men he had knocked unconscious earlier also had one, he thought that it was probably something like a token of authority. He shook his head and walked toward the outside. The man didn't pay much attention to it. He picked up the teacup and blew on it a few times. Suddenly, he was startled and a little absent-minded. His companion asked, "What's wrong?" The experiments these 2 days might have been a little tiring. My eyes were a little dazzled just now. The man took a sip of tea and thought to himself, otherwise, how could such a beautiful face appear in front of him just now? It was easy for Jingjiu to make a bracelet, but if the bracelet needed to match the aura of the owner before it could leave, then it would indeed be a little troublesome. He came to a remote and quiet room. Looking at the cobweb-like pipes on the roof, he found that his mood was a little chaotic, which was rare just like the pipes. It wasn't the fear of the unknown, which would only make him feel excited. It wasn't the vigilance against danger either, which would only make him feel a clearer sense of existence, which would then make him feel happy. He just felt that doing these purely routine, procedural, and meaningless things such as hiding, changing, checking, and then leaving was really annoying. He did this because he felt that even though the celestial world was much more backward than he had imagined, it was still the celestial world, and he should keep a low profile. But this was really annoying and a waste of time. He looked at the pipes on the roof and decided to change his way of doing things without any reason. A breeze rose in the room, taking his figure away. Dozens of cracks appeared on the pipes on the roof, and then they all collapsed, like giant snakes that had been cut into countless pieces. In the core area of the heavily guarded base, an extremely bright sword light appeared. The sword light flew up. Whether it was the hardest alloy layer or the most heat-resistant composite material blocking the way, it would break when it encountered the sword light. The most terrifying thing was that the sword light was so fast that the base's surveillance equipment couldn't capture it at all and could only vaguely calculate that its speed should have surpassed that of a Feather-class warship. An ear-piercing alarm sounded in the underground space, and the warning lights on the platforms on each floor began to flash rapidly. The mobile guards were dispatched as fast as possible, and the laboratories began to be divided into sections and isolated, and the top-secret data in the computers began to be deeply recorded. When all these things had just begun, the sword light had already flown out of the base and arrived at the only entrance to the outside world. There was a powerful automatic weapon base in the cliff here, with a powerful main laser cannon installed. At this time, it had already begun to adjust its position and aimed at the exit. Jingjiu didn't know what kind of main laser cannon it was, but he sensed danger ahead, so he waved his hand without a second thought. Dozens of sword lights flew out from his hand and landed on the cliff walls at an unimaginable speed. The main laser cannon had just been ready to fire when it was cut into a pile of scrap iron. The sword lights didn't stop there. They went deep into the automatic weapon base and caused an explosion. It was unclear what they had hit. Boom! Boom! The explosions were deafening, and the hot flames and airwaves came out. Jingjiu didn't turn his head around. He found that his speed had indeed slowed down, and it couldn't be compared to when he was in Chaotian. It seemed that the level of this world was indeed a bit low. Chapter 763. The only places in Chaotian that had so many metal mines and were willing to display them without any aesthetic sense were the mountain gates of the equipment sect, save for the palace of the Dongyi Dao King. Jingjiu thought that this place was a mountain gate of the equipment sect in the fairy world, located in a deep mountain. As such, the sword light should come out from the peak top if it kept flying upward. He intended to take a look at this world in its entirety, like the distant mountains and the nearby rivers. Unexpectedly, he was still in the underground after flying out. There was no blue sky above his head, but a small patch of dark space at a high altitude, with some stars in it. It was probably the universe where he had stayed. It was dark all around, and the tall lampposts emitted a dim light that was hard to tell if it was bright or dim. No one could be seen on the quiet street. Only a few rooms in the buildings on both sides of the street had lights on. It was unclear what kind of material the lamps were made of, but they were even more stable than the luminous pearls, devoid of any flickering. The nearest building was a 5-story building. The only room with lights on was flickering. Jingjiu flew over curiously and soon arrived outside the window. He saw a girl with silvery hair leaning against a chair with her eyes closed, her fingers resting on a magic treasure. She must have fallen asleep while operating it. In the next moment, he noticed a light screen in the room, on which the changing scenes were the source of the flickering lights. Looking at the light screen, he could vaguely hear some voices and understand the language. The army of this world was fighting against the enemy in a corner of the universe and had won a great victory. Looking at the black monster floating in the universe on the light screen, Jingjiu arched his eyebrows slightly. He had intended to leave this place and kill anyone who dared block his way with a swing of his sword like he had done many years ago. Nothing in this backward world could threaten him anyway. However, he changed his mind at the moment. The dead monster looked like a huge black handleless dandelion. Wasn't it the heavenly demon of the outside world he had encountered? Weren't those flying devices that looked like sword boats aimed at the heavenly demons those burning flying swords? It was evident that the heavenly demons of the outside world were a species whose goal was to devour and kill others. They were a threat to Chaotian. The enemy of the enemy was a friend. The humans in this world and those in Chaotian must have had a close relationship, no matter how one looked at it. They might even be of the same origin. He glanced at the sleeping silver-haired girl and thought to himself, I should be careful not to kill too many people here when I leave. Suddenly, the silver-haired girl's face was illuminated, and the light in the room suddenly intensified. He turned back to look at the light screen, only to see the battleships shooting straight beams of light at the dozen or so extraterrestrial demons in the distance. Those rays of light were very thick. Even through the window and the light screen, one could still feel the power contained within. The lightning that he encountered at the beginning of the heavenly tribulation was probably the same, right? Suddenly, the screen of light turned snow-white. A certain point in the dark universe exploded. Unimaginable light surged in all directions, instantly forming a huge fireball. The appearance of the fireball reminded him of the white fireball outside Chaotian and the huge red fireball he saw at the end. Was it possible that the white fireball was also filled with fairy energy? There was actually such a magic treasure in this world. It was really scary. This was the fairy world after all. The amount of fairy energy was so great. Though this method was clumsy and wasteful and inefficient, the figures in the heavenly arrival state in Chaotian might not be able to withstand it. His evaluation of this world had improved by a few levels. He lifted his head to look at the small patch of night sky. His line of sight passed through the clouds and fog and saw a dozen platforms with different architectural styles. He saw the humans in fancy clothes who didn't want to sleep even at night, and he saw the deep part of the universe. A few battleships were floating slowly there, looking almost the same as the battleships in the light screen. Those lightning-like rays of the heavenly tribulation and the powerful fairy energy weapon were all fired from these battleships. Let's take a look first. Jingjiu made up his mind without any hesitation. He reached out his hand to destroy the small magic treasure that was obviously used for surveillance, pushed open the window, and walked in. It was unclear whether it was because of the wind blowing in from outside the window or because of the unexpected guest in the room. The girl with silvery hair turned over on the chair, showing signs of waking up. Jingjiu shot her a glance, and she relaxed instantly, falling into a deep sleep again. The scene on the light screen had changed. It was no longer the battleships and the burning fireballs, but the scene in the room. A woman was dancing there in a tight dress. The dance movements were not graceful in Jingjiu's eyes, but merely repetitive mechanical movements. The woman seemed to be very tired, panting heavily, but for some reason, she kept talking. Jingjiu wanted to learn more about this world, but he found it hard to understand. After a moment of bewilderment, he picked up the magic treasure from the chest of the girl with silvery hair and studied it. He tried to send a sword source into the treasure. The screen glowed faintly and then died out again. This magic treasure was not as advanced as the magic treasures in Chaotian, but it was more complicated than the magic treasures in Chaotian. Many delicate magic treasures were hidden inside it, so it was extremely fragile and could be destroyed if he was careless. Now that he couldn't use the sword source to occupy it, he had to try to find the switch. Jingjiu used the sword will to observe the internal structure of the magic treasure carefully again. He found the central part of the magic treasure like what he did in the lab, and then noticed a round button at the bottom of the magic treasure. Judging from the size and shape of the round button, it should have something to do with the fingers. Jingjiu pulled the right hand of the girl with silvery hair and pressed her forefinger on the button. Whoosh! The yuan qi in the magic treasure flowed faster, and the smooth side of the button glowed, showing a scene. He pressed the button reflexively with his finger, and the scene changed immediately. Then, he pressed the button repeatedly. The scene on the light screen died out, turning into nothingness. The light in the room was still flickering, coming from the magic treasure he had turned on. It didn't take long before the rooster crowed in the room. Jingjiu looked in the direction of the sound, and found that it was not a chicken coop, but a simple and crude small device. A kind of bullet-like substance was vibrating inside the device, imitating the rooster's crowing. The strange symbols on the device were flashing incessantly. The silver-haired girl slowly got up like a zombie, walked to the alarm clock, turned it off, and lay back on the chair. It took a long time for her to gradually wake up. She didn't notice Jingjiu's presence during the whole process. From the moment she woke up, Jingjiu had been standing behind her, not making a sound. "Why did I fall asleep again?" the silver-haired girl mumbled, yawned, and rubbed her eyes. Then, she found that the computer wasn't sleeping. She looked at the screen and suddenly froze. A moment later, she screamed, "Ah, my manuscript! My paper! Who deleted it? I've been writing for half a month. Goldie, you son of a B***TCH. Did you do it?" Only then did she remember that her cat had died a few days ago. Looking at the cabinet in front of her, she slowly lowered her head and hugged it with both hands. She was silent for a long time. Jingjiu followed her gaze and found a picture on the cabinet. In the picture, the silver-haired girl was holding a yellow cat in her arms. As a cat owner, he was very sure that there was no cat in this room, and there was no smell of a cat. So that was it. It didn't take long for the silver-haired girl to calm down. She washed, drank water, took medicine, and then sat on the chair and began to eat breakfast in silence. Jingjiu followed behind her like a ghost, watching her wash, drink water, take medicine, and eat breakfast in silence. Then, he opened the magic device and began to type something. He memorized all the tools in the room and all the details of her movements in his mind. After breakfast, the silver-haired girl went out, not knowing what she was going to do. Jingjiu didn't leave with her. He stood in the toilet in silence and only came out when he heard the door being locked. He walked to the cabinet and looked at the yellow cat in the picture. He was silent for a moment. The picture was three-dimensional, and the person and the dog in it seemed real. There was a very vivid feeling, just like the screen he saw last night. He wasn't surprised by this. The heavenly retrieval pearl could do it, and it could do it better. He sat on the chair and was surprised that it was very comfortable. He adjusted his position and picked up the remote control to turn on the screen like the silver-haired girl had done. He was ready to watch TV. Yes, he now knew that this thing was called TV. The screen appeared out of nowhere. It began to show pictures and sounds. He watched for a while and began to learn how to speak. According to this station, beep, an ear-piercing alarm suddenly sounded in the room. Chapter 764. Jingjiu grabbed the alarm from a distance and crushed it into pieces. The ear-piercing alarm stopped abruptly. This magic treasure should be able to send an alarm when it collected the sound of a stranger. The people in this world were living too intensely. Yet, there were so many magic treasures in such an ordinary courtyard house. It seemed that the status of the equipment sect here was quite high. Thinking of all this, Jingjiu walked into the toilet and threw the powder in his hand into the toilet bowl. Then, he pressed the button to flush the toilet bowl away. He had seen the young woman use the toilet bowl in the early morning, so he knew it was a toilet bowl that flushed automatically. Though it was a bit novel, he didn't feel sentimental about it, because he had no use for it anyway. He walked back to the living room and adjusted the cushions. He lay down in a more comfortable position and began to watch TV again, trying to learn how the people here spoke. In the beginning, his pronunciation was a bit awkward, but as he grew more proficient, he began to compare the pronunciation with what he understood in his consciousness, and the pronunciation became clearer and clearer. The words on the TV looked similar to the words in Chao Tian, but he couldn't understand them at all. Jingjiu got up from the chair reluctantly and walked into another room. This room was not very large. The three walls were lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, and the books were arranged neatly on the bookshelves, making the room look even more cramped. Standing in the middle of the room, one would have a strong feeling of being pressed down. It was unclear why there were so many books on paper. Jingjiu sat down on the floor with his legs crossed. As he moved his fingers slightly, all the books on the bookshelves drifted out, moving without the aid of the wind. Back in the Guoqing Temple, he and the Zen master used this method to read the scripts. It was the most convenient and efficient method. Soon, he found that he had made a mistake. He couldn't understand the words in these books, so it was useless no matter how fast he read them. He picked two books that seemed to be the easiest to understand and probably related to the introduction of words, and started reading. In the next moment, he started reading other books. The doors and windows of the room were closed tightly, and the curtains blocked the scenery on the street and the narrow corner of the universe. Though there was no wind, the books floating in the air were turning the pages on their own. Without any light, he was reading them with his eyes closed. All of a sudden, a faint tearing sound rang out. These books were already very old, and some of the paper had already turned yellow and brittle. Just like that, they were flipped by the formless wind, and they actually broke just like that. Twilight was also an extremely luxurious thing for the streets below. The change between day and night was always so fast and silent under the interference of the bright street lights, catching people off guard. The door opened, and the silver-haired girl walked in tiredly. She casually threw her bag on the table, and then threw herself on the bench. She lay there for a long time. Just when Jingjiu thought she would fall asleep, she stood up and poured herself a glass of water. After taking her medicine and dinner, she walked into the room, opened the curtains, and looked at the tiny night sky above the street. Her eyes were full of yearning. After an unknown period of time, she withdrew her gaze and turned to leave. Suddenly, she saw a piece of paper under the bookshelf. She squatted down to pick it up, and her expression changed abruptly. She searched the bookshelf with her trembling fingers. Finally, she found a book and opened it. One of the pages was indeed torn. Studying in the academy was already very tiring, and living alone made her feel powerless and exhausted. At this time, when she returned home and saw that her most precious thing was suddenly damaged, the silver-haired girl could no longer bear it. She hugged her knees and squatted on the ground, crying, "Damn, little yellow, I miss you guys so much. I'm so useless. Why is this world so unfair?" Standing behind her, Jingjiu didn't let his shadow fall on her, listening to her sad story while crying. Her mother died due to a problem in the gene modification when the girl was very young. Her father was a professor at the New Era Institute. In order to prepare the funds for her gene modification in the future, he followed the advice of an important figure and invested all his savings in a fund, and even paid off the loan. Unexpectedly, the merchant fleet guaranteed by the fund encountered a dreadful battle between a human swordsman and the mother nest on their way back. More than 30 merchant ships and their cargo were all turned into green smoke. The fund went bankrupt. Her father had no choice but to declare bankruptcy because he owed a large sum of money to the bank. He moved from the residential area of the institute to the lower level, where he didn't need to pay the rent. Bankruptcy was not the problem. The real problem was the debt. He couldn't complete the expensive gene modification of the third level for his beloved daughter anymore. All he could do was watch her being consumed by the disease like her mother. The seemingly strong man was actually so fragile at some point. He chose to commit suicide. In the professor's opinion, his daughter wouldn't have to bear the debt with him, so she would have an easier time in her limited life. However, he had never thought that his death would be the heaviest burden for his daughter. In addition to his own death, the professor left his daughter a room full of paper books and a cat. Now the big yellow cat was dead as well. The silver-haired girl couldn't stop crying while holding her knees. Looking at her, Jingjiu apologized to her in his mind. Jingjiu wouldn't feel sorry even if he destroyed the inherited heaven sword, to say nothing of tearing a piece of paper. The reason he had such a feeling toward the silver-haired girl was because the big yellow cat in the photo reminded him of Ada, whom he might never see again. He had a strange feeling about her. In short, he lived in this house like a ghost. He watched TV with the silver-haired girl, watched her play on the computer, and listened to her murmuring to herself. He played on the computer in secret after she fell asleep and used the magic to cool down the computer before she woke up. He would sit in the chair and watch TV after she went to school. He would only go to that room to read books when he felt bored. His actions were much more careful now. It took him only a few days to learn that the name of the silver-haired girl was Zone Lizzie, as well as her life since she was a child and many other things related to this world. This was a human world. It was true that they were the same as the humans in Chao Tian. Humans. The two of them were very similar in terms of their body structure, their way of thinking, their way of communicating their emotions and words. If they were considered in the context of a long period of time and a boundless universe, they were exactly the same. Jingjiu relied on the TV, the computer, the books, and the observation of the silver-haired girl to come to this conclusion. This human world occupied a part of the universe, and there were probably hundreds of solar systems. In terms of administration, they were independent, but they had a unified, symbolic king, and in terms of military and science, they had to accept the unified leadership of the alliance. This unified organization was called the Human Federation of the Milky Way. Jingjiu was on a planet called the Stargate. This planet had been emptied many years ago, and it was an important base of the Federation. There were dozens of human governments similar to the one on the Stargate in the Federation of the Milky Way, each of which had a female priest. The most important function of the female priest was to pass on the ancient knowledge. It was rumored that the ancient knowledge came from the distant ancient civilization a great many years ago. It was said that the distant ancient civilization of the humans was very advanced and had created a magnificent scene in the universe. Unfortunately, they encountered the most formidable enemy in the universe, the sea of dark matter, in the later stage. The distant ancient civilization and the sea of dark matter had perished together in a brutal war, and the universe had recovered its initial peace. New flowers would grow out of the dust. As time elapsed, the humans and their enemies had recovered from the nothingness at the same time, and then resumed the war that was like a cycle. What mattered now was who could recover to the heyday of their civilization and wipe out their opponents. In this war, the Federation of the Milky Way had been on the defensive or at a disadvantage. Even though the gene modification had been improved and the cultivation of martial arts had been popularized, they were still not a match for the evil dark forces. They were on the verge of being defeated and being swallowed up. A few swordsmen with godlike strength and leaders with unimaginable mental strength had suddenly appeared in the Federation 100 years ago. They had led the Federation to hang on until today. Jing Jiu liked the terms universe, permanent star, and planet very much, and he was quite used to the term king, but he was a bit unfamiliar with the terms administration, gene, and civilization. As for the term sea of dark matter, it was a bit too casual. It was no different from the Milky Way he had read on the bookshelf. The descriptions of a sea of dark matter in the books and on the television news he had read were rather vague, and it was evident that the sea of dark matter was covered up. Jing Jiu didn't believe that the sea of dark matter had only those black, handleless dandelions. Those monsters gave him a familiar feeling, indicating that the sea of dark matter was not so simple. Those godlike swordsmen and wise leaders who had suddenly appeared 100 years ago also gave him a familiar feeling. This had nothing to do with his narcissism, but rather with time. If one day in the starry sky was equivalent to 1 year in Chaotian, 100 years was equivalent to 30,000 years in Chaotian. It was the time when the founding grandmasters of Aoyama ascended. It was also the time when the founding grandmasters of Zhongzhou School ascended. Where did those ascendants of Chaotian go later? Was there any connection between these two events? It was not Jing Jiu's habit to look up at the starry sky and consider the fate of the humans, even when he was in the underground sewer. He had to solve his own problem first. The most important thing for him was the nature of this world. Why did those fireballs, which were called permanent stars, emit the purest fairy energy? Jing Jiu thought that he needed to study all kinds of knowledge systematically, including astronomy and physics, just like what he had done back in the small village. The computer of the girl with silvery hair required the identification of her retina to access the network of the Institute, and the regular network for civilian use had many restrictions. The books in the room were not deep enough, and the TV was full of nonsense, devoid of any useful information. What should he do? Moreover, living in this house like a ghost, it was not convenient for him to use the computer or read the books. He thought he should make some changes. One night, Zhong Lizi returned to the underground neighborhood from the New Era Institute and walked into her house with tired steps. She took off the hairband, her silvery hair flowing down, looking as beautiful as the starlight. After pouring a cup of water and taking the pills, she was about to throw herself onto the soft chair like a school bag when she suddenly felt a sense of loss, as if something that had been with her for a long time had left her. It was like her father leaving her house soundlessly, or a little yellow dog sneaking out of the house before his death. Looking at her house and ascertaining that nothing had changed, she couldn't help but smile wryly, thinking that nobody had been with her all this time. What was she thinking about? It was then that the doorbell rang. Feeling surprised, she turned on the light screen and asked, "Who is it? What's the matter?" A youth wearing a tracksuit and a hat appeared on the light screen. I saw the recruitment notice for co-renting on the network of the Institute. The brim of the hat was a bit low, blocking the youth's face, but it didn't block his voice. Today is the birthday of the punching bag and the fire beacon, as well as Chun Changsheng. Tomorrow is the birthday of the butterfly blue. Happy birthday to them, and happy birthday to everybody. Chapter 765. Zhong Lizi had been counting the days and money in order to live. The New Era Institute exempted her from the tuition fees for her father's sake, but she had to eat to survive. More importantly, she couldn't stop taking the medicine to cure her illness. Moreover, she still had a glimmer of hope deep in her heart that she might be able to undergo the third genetic modification in the future and cure her illness. She couldn't make a living by working part-time at the Institute, and she couldn't find a part-time job in the dim neighborhood. As such, she didn't dare go up there to seek opportunities for adventure. As such, she had only one option left, which was to rent out her room. She had posted the recruitment notice on the network of the Institute a long time ago and was prepared to give up her bedroom and live in the study room if someone was willing to rent out her room. However, none of the students who were qualified to study at the Institute were willing to live in the neighborhood at the lowest level. The recruitment notice had been posted for many days, but there had been no response. Yet, one of them suddenly came today, and he didn't make a phone call, but came directly to her door. It didn't make sense, making her feel uneasy and alarmed, especially when the other party wore a hat and pulled the brim of the hat down, looking like those perverted killers in the movies. But why did this person have such a pleasant voice? The youth wearing the hat was none other than Jingjio. He didn't expect that the common sense he had learned in the last few days was not enough, nor did he expect that the door was open because of his voice. He had learned the way he spoke from the anchors and reporters in the news. His articulation was perfect and his voice was moving. It was the rumored broadcasting voice. The purpose of the broadcasting voice was to persuade and convince people, even if what he said was false. "Please come in." Zhong Lizi felt a bit impulsive after she let him in. She forced herself to calm down and invited him to sit in a chair, pouring a cup of water for him. Jingjiu took out a cushion from under his body and put it under the armrest on the left side of the chair in a natural manner. Then he pointed to the tea table, indicating that it was fine to put it there. Zhong Lizi was taken aback a bit, thinking that this person didn't regard himself as an outsider. She cleared her throat and said, "I'd like to see your identification card first." Jingjiu knew this was common sense, but it happened in a hurry. To put it more precisely, it was because he was too lazy to prepare. Jingjiu took off the hat. His face was his passport in Chaotian. Did it work here as well? It was deathly quiet in the room. Zhong Lizi opened her mouth slightly while looking at Jingjiu's face. She was so shocked that she couldn't speak for a while. Jingjiu said, "I have some inconveniences." Zhong Lizi was a smart girl. She came back to her senses from the initial shock and vaguely guessed what was going on. After a moment of silence, she said through gritted teeth, "I want more money then." Jingjiu had learned a profound lesson when he traveled with Zhao Liu. He knew the importance of money and was prepared for it. He took out a gold coin from his pocket and placed it on the table. Last night, he checked the rental information of this street on the computer, went to a black market arcade to get a set of sportswear, and took a gold coin from the pot-belly boss's safe. This gold coin was about 3 fingers wide, engraved with complicated patterns by laser. It was the common currency of the Federation of the Milky Way. According to the metal exchange information he had found, this gold coin was enough to pay the rent for a house like this for 3 years. He only planned to stay here for 9 days, so it should be more than enough. Zhong Lizi was shocked again. It was not because the amount was too large, but because the Stargate and other galaxies used the credit points to conduct the transactions. Who would use the cash? More importantly, this kind of gold coin was rare in circulation. Most of the gold coins were collected by the people in the upper echelons, save for a small portion circulating in the black market. This youth was unbelievably good-looking. He had an air of nobility while sitting on a chair. It was impossible for him to be a guy who lived in the black market. Zhong Lizi was certain that he was a member of the upper echelons. "Have you read all the conditions in the recruitment notice?" she asked. Jingjiu uttered Zhong Lizi thought that the important figures were all as taciturn as those in the movies. "What do you think about it?" she asked. Jingjiu had lived in this house like a ghost for a few days, so he knew what this girl didn't like. "I'll watch the news for an hour at 8 o'clock every night. I won't cook, and I'll use the toilet only after you leave. I'll make sure the house stays the same every day," he said. As for sharing the expenses, keeping the house clean, and not being allowed to bring others back, he didn't even mention it. Yet, Zhong Lizi was quite satisfied. She thought that a person who came from the upper echelons couldn't possibly have any friends, and that his obsession with cleanliness must be worse than hers. As such, there was nothing to worry about. Besides, he was so good-looking. "Deal." Zhong Lizi stood up, intending to show Jingjiu around the bedroom and bring her bedding to the study room. Jingjiu stood up and walked to the door of the study room, saying, "I'll sleep here." "This is the study room," said Zhong Lizi. "It's too small." Jingjiu needed to read books, and he could see a corner of the distant universe through the small window, which could prevent the battleships from bombarding him with the small stars. Jingjiu opened the door rudely and pretended to inspect the room, saying, "This is the room." Zhong Lizi felt uneasy when she saw that he wasn't being polite. "Then should I reduce the rent for you?" she asked. "No need." Jing Jiu fixed his gaze on the tea table and the computer, saying, "If you don't mind, you can lend me the computer." The gold coin was enough to buy a few computers of the latest model for civilian use. Zhong Lizi didn't mind. She gave the computer to Jing Jiu after making a small bed for him in the study room. This youth was a nice person, though he was a bit reticent and refused her invitation to have dinner together. Zhong Lizi thought of this while looking at the tightly closed door of the study room. She suddenly thought of something and pushed open the door, saying the password. There was no password in the computer, and there was nothing confidential about it. It was just that she had forgotten to tell the password to Jing Jiu. Jing Jiu spun his head around and uttered to express his bewilderment. The computer screen was lit up, and many blue bytes of data were scrolling on it. "It's nothing." Zhong Lizi shook her head quickly like a little puppy. She turned around and ran out of the study room, not forgetting to close the door for Jing Jiu. She came to the soft chair and looked at the photo on the cupboard while holding the furry toy in her arms. After a long moment of silence, she said softly, "Little Yellow, he is a highly skilled computer user." Jing Jiu had only used the computer a few days ago, but he was probably a highly skilled computer user. Even if he wasn't, he would become one in the future. Yet, he could access Zhong Lizi's computer without the password, which had nothing to do with the Cloud Ghost's ability to crack the code. He had been using the computer in the last few days. For convenience's sake, he had copied Zhong Lizi's fingerprint on his finger when she was asleep. He suddenly thought of an important matter and walked out of the study room with the computer in his arms. "Can you help me log into the Institute network? I can pay more." Before Zhong Lizi could respond, Jing Jiu raised the computer in front of her and aimed it at her eyes. Zhong Lizi was bewildered, wondering if he was a highly skilled computer user. Jing Jiu had thought of copying Zhong Lizi's iris so that he wouldn't mind staying as a ghost in this room. However, the iris was rather complicated, and he had to observe it for a long time. He couldn't stare into her eyes without being discovered by her, and it would be indecent to open her eyelids after she fell asleep. Well, he was fully aware that he had to enter this world in order to master everything in this world. As such, it was only a matter of time before he turned back from a ghost to a human. He was quite familiar with this room and the girl with silvery hair. As such, this was the best choice. In the following days, he watched TV and read books during the day and logged into the Institute network to study when she came back in the evening. He did nothing else. Zhong Lizi noticed that the ration of food didn't decrease, and Jing Jiu seldom rested, feeling worried. On the first day, Jing Jiu had learned all the courses in the standard teaching materials of the Federation of the Milky Way and the dialects of various planets. On the second day, he had learned all the courses in astronomy and geography. On the third day, he had learned all the courses in biology and chemistry. On the fourth day, he began to study physics, but he found it a bit difficult. On the fifth day, he decided to change his way of thinking. He read the courses in art and music, but he didn't find it interesting. After reading hundreds of books on philosophy and theology, he found they were almost the same as those in Chaotian. On the sixth day, he resumed his study of physics. On the seventh day, he resumed his study of physics. On the evening of the eighth day, Zhong Lizi had finally noticed his unsightly expression. "What's the problem?" she asked. Jing Jiu thought there was nothing to be embarrassed about as he turned the computer toward her. Looking at the problem on the computer screen, Zhong Lizi remained silent for a while before asking, "Have you been studying the minimum energy constant in the last few days?" Jing Jiu uttered before saying, "The name quantum is quite interesting, but it's very difficult." Zhong Lizi looked at him as if she were looking at a monster, saying, "Are you sure a regular student at the New Era Institute like me can understand this?" Jing Jiu had no idea about the average knowledge level of this world. "I think astrophysics is more interesting, but there are some problems I can't figure out," he said. Zhong Lizi thought she shouldn't blame quantum physics for her misfortune. Though it was true that she didn't know much about it, it was easy to study astronomy. "What are the problems I can't figure out?" she asked excitedly. Jing Jiu asked, "What happened before the Big Bang of the universe?" Zhong Lizi got up silently and fetched a cup of water. Jing Jiu continued, "According to your theory, The concept of time didn't exist before the universe came into being. As such, the question of what happened before is a non-existent problem. Zhong Lizi thought the professor had said the same thing, so she said hastily, "That's right. That's right. Maybe this theory is correct," Jingjiu said after thinking for a long time. "But I don't like it." Zhong Lizi almost spat out the water in her mouth, wondering if the rules of physics would change just because he didn't like it. She was more worried about this youth's mental state. "Why don't you read the teaching materials on the cultivation and gene modification?" she asked. "It's the end," replied Jingjiu. He paid no more attention to her and looked at the computer screen again. When he saw the hypothesis of the high-string theory of a certain scientist, he thought of Nan Wang's sword string and Chao Tian. He got up and walked to the window, looking at a corner of the universe in the high sky, thinking that Old Tan should have come out by now. Whether Old Tan had come out or not is one thing, but the simplified book of The Path Toward Heaven has indeed come out. It should be on the shelves in all the bookstores on November 20th, but the book is already on sale on the internet. The publishing house asked me to inform you that many bookstores will have the coupons on November 11th. If you want to buy the physical book, you should book it as soon as possible. You can save money if you get the coupons. Well, I didn't expect that someone who had decided not to buy anything on November 11th would start selling things on November 11th. The world is truly marvelous. I'll post the relevant links on the official account today. Chapter 766. Before leaving Chaotian, Jingjiu had arranged everything and calculated many things. For instance, the immortal Tan would be the second person to ascend. Though old Tan looked dull and useless, he was actually very powerful after being bullied by his wife for hundreds of years and scared by Bai Run. He didn't dare take the step forward. His strength lay in his broad forehead and broad-mindedness, as well as his honesty. Now that Bai Run and Bai Junren were both dead, the pressure from his wife's family had vanished, and the affection for his wife had been erased. As such, he could take the step forward smoothly. As for making the fairy ladies to replenish the spiritual energy in Chaotian, he had discussed this with the immortal Tan when he sold Tong Yin back to the Zhongzhou school. He had told Jian Shilai and Chao Yuan the same thing. Who would ascend after the immortal Tan then? Chao Yuan was of course very powerful, but it was not easy for him to think it through. It depended on when Jian Shilai would come out, and when Shi Sui would be able to completely grasp the essence of the all-in-one sword. As for the little snow girl in the snowland, she was still too young. Though she had a child with Peng Lang, she would still have to wait many years before she could leave. The problem was that the little snow girl would grow up quickly and learn how to fight. When she quarreled with her mother, which side would Peng Lang stand on? If the family of three fought, it would be earth-shattering and the whole of Chaotian would be destroyed. Fortunately, Ping Yongka was still in Aoyama, so he was safe. There was no need for Jingjiu to worry about him. What he really cared about was how many of the cultivation practitioners of the next generation in Chaotian would ascend hundreds of years later. Little Leu would ascend for sure, but was it possible for Shi Sui? The flow of time in this world called the Stargate was different from that in the universe. It was unclear whether hundreds of years in Chaotian were equivalent to a few years or a few decades in this world. Thinking of all this, Jingjiu felt a rare sense of frustration. He pulled back his line of sight from that corner of the universe and returned to the living room. He picked up the computer and resumed studying college physics. It was the 8th day of his systematic study and the 4th day of studying physics, but it was still very difficult. It didn't take long before he chose to give up for the first time in his life. He picked up the remote control and turned on the TV, watching a TV series called The Interstellar Wanderers. The silver-haired girl, Zhong Lizi, guessed that he was still focused on his studies, judging from his motionless posture and his gaze in the distance. She felt both admiration and baffled. Since this young man was someone from above, he must have received an excellent education since he was young. Moreover, he should have completed the infusion of knowledge. Why did he have to study so hard like me? She said, I really think it's too difficult. Why don't we change courses? Jingjiu thought what she said was reasonable. He uttered and said, I'll read the simplest math tomorrow. Zhong Lizi widened her eyes, wondering if he was crazy. The simplest math? She repeated. Jingjiu thought, what's wrong? This was what he was best at. The next day happened to be a rest day. Zhong Lizi didn't go to school, and she had finished the paper. As such, Jingjiu had the right to use the computer all day. He turned on his computer, logged into the Academy's website, opened the section related to lesson plans, and entered the mathematics section. Since it was a systematic study, he had to start with the basic teaching materials, such as 1 + 1 = 2. He was quite familiar with the strange symbols by now. He had successfully finished the elementary school, middle school, and high school courses. His eyebrows arched up, and then they rose higher and higher. When he started studying the mathematics of the university, his eyebrows finally dropped down. He looked at the computer silently for a long time. Zhong Lizi went out to get the relief voucher and brought back a week's worth of food. When she came back, she found Jingjiu was still staring at the screen of the computer, his posture unchanged. Is it difficult? I failed the course in the second semester, she said. The idea is indeed a bit odd, but it's not that difficult. Having said this, Jingjiu resumed his study. He had finally learned the number theory at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He was still studying the number theory at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. At 6 o'clock in the afternoon, he decided to change his way of thinking and rest his brain. As a result, he jumped to the algebraic geometry. Afterwards, he didn't manage to jump to the next level. It was late at night, and the TV had been turned off. An excited rooster's crowing suddenly broke out in a corner. It was a good alarm clock. Jingjiu lifted his head and found that it was past 12 o'clock, which meant that the 9 days were over. He hadn't finished studying physics yet. As for the simplest mathematics, he didn't want to remember the name for the time being. He turned off the computer and lay on the chair. He pulled out the cushion from under his body and held it in his chest. Then he rolled up on his side and stared at the photo on the wardrobe in a daze. Zhong Lizi was woken up by the alarm clock. She walked out of the bedroom while rubbing her eyes. The first thing she saw was such a scene. Are you all right? She asked worriedly. My calculating ability is unparalleled in the world, and I'm a unique genius. It took me only 9 days to learn everything about life, including chopping firewood, cooking, and transplanting rice seedlings. Looking at the yellow cat with a disgusting smile in the photo while holding the cushion, Jingjiu asked confusedly, why can't I do it now? Is it because the level of this world is too low, affecting the speed of my thinking? Zhong Lizi vaguely understood what Jingjiu meant. She felt both angry and amused, thinking that it was not a matter of learning everything by rote. Even if he were the most powerful computer in the Federation of the Milky Way, he still couldn't solve all the problems in 9 days. There were many unsolvable problems in the field of science to begin with. Happiness, sadness, frustration, and self-blame were all momentary emotions for the immortals who had achieved success in cultivation. Jingjiu soon stopped thinking about it. He got up, picked up the pen on the tea table, and wrote down 2 words on the paper. Year. Robot. Taiping Jinren asked Jingjiu twice before his death, what is a year? When Jingjiu woke up in the lab, he heard the 2 scientists say that he was a liquid metal robot. What was a robot then? Jingjiu had a profound understanding of the concepts of year and robot through reading and studying over the last few days, including the origin of the words, the characteristics of the cultures in various galaxies, the 3 laws, and the awakening of artificial intelligence. But he still couldn't answer these 2 questions. Yet, Zhong Lizi was thinking of another question at the moment. She leaned over to take a look and asked, the paper is very expensive. Why don't you write it on the computer? I'm more used to using paper and pen, said Jingjiu. Zhong Lizi thought that he was indeed a rich person from the upper class, or an old man who liked to revisit the ancient style. Jingjiu suddenly stared into her eyes, his expression quite profound, as if he wanted to see through her mind. Feeling a bit shy, Zhong Lizi attempted to turn her head around reflexively. Don't move, said Jingjiu in an exceedingly attractive voice. Zhong Lizi was extremely nervous. She clutched her pajamas tightly, thinking that they had known each other for only 10 days. It was too fast. A minute later, Jingjio had finished scanning her iris. He nodded satisfactorily and asked, "How can I send out a message and let the whole world, no, the whole universe, see it?" Zhong Lizi was taken aback for a long time. 2 blushes appeared on her face at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was not because she was shy this time, but because she was angry. The obvious evidence was her silvery hair tousling, even though there was no wind in the room. Yet, she couldn't tell Jingjio about this misunderstanding. She forced herself to calm down after taking 2 deep breaths and thinking of the doctor's advice. "As long as I have enough money, I can do anything," she said expressionlessly. Jingjio thought that though this neighborhood was poor, he should be able to gather enough money if he went to a few shops to withdraw some money. "I can solve it," he said. Hearing this, Zhong Lizi's eyes beamed slightly, and her mood improved a lot. She started giving Jingjio some advice. "Even if we have enough money to buy the advertisement and let the whole of the Federation of the Milky Way see it, some people won't be able to see it. For instance, the members of the Federation of the Milky Way can be exempted from the advertisement." Zhong Lizi was a smart girl, so she figured out what Jingjio was looking for by sending out the message. "What is the most attractive thing, then?" asked Jingjio. "What?" Zhong Lizi pressed. Jingjio had a suspicion when he thought of the collection of romance novels in a deep folder on the computer. What he couldn't understand the most was why someone would write novels and why so many people were willing to do so, be it in Chaotian or here. If one wished to experience a different life through a story, one could build a new world in one's own consciousness and create characters, and then let the characters interact with each other according to the desired plot. They could fight each other to the death, love each other, and create a great many different types of love and hate, life and death. Moreover, the magic treasures in this world were quite advanced, like the heavenly retrieval orb. Now that they could create the realistic figures of the characters, why did they still need to read the words? Zhong Lizi said, "The story is the foundation, which is processed by the light cabin. As a result, the people can create the characters according to their own ideas and let them play the roles in the story as if they were alive." "How come you don't know this?" Jingjio thought that the people who had left in the story would still die, even if they came back to life in this way. "I'll write a story then," said Jingjio. "You should publish it on the website of the Institute first. If you have enough subscriptions, you can buy the right to publish it on the Starzone network." Zhong Lizi asked earnestly while staring into his eyes, "Is your story interesting?" Jingjio said, "This is a story about the people of Jingyang. The characters have distinct personalities, the plot is complicated and ever-changing, and the writing is fresh and accurate." It was true that what he wanted to write was the story of Chaotian in the last 1,000 years. If there were any ascendants from Chaotian in this world, like the founding grandmasters of the Aoyama sect or the immortal Chunyang, they would definitely come to this world after reading this story. The universe was too vast, and there were too many humans. It would be difficult for Jingjio to find those predecessors and colleagues who had ascended. Moreover, the battleships and the magic treasures that could explode with the fairy energy were out there. It was dangerous. It was best for him to stay in this inconspicuous neighborhood and wait for those colleagues to come to him. Of course, he hoped that the Snow Girl would come. If nobody came after a while, he would enter the high platform amid the clouds and fog and look for new clues in other places in the universe. "What on earth are you looking for?" asked Zhong Lizi. "I'm looking for an answer," replied Jingjio. Feeling curious, Zhong Lizi asked, "What answer?" "Who am I?" replied Jingjio. Zhong Lizi said while looking at him sympathetically, "Don't read the books on philosophy. What if you become stupid?" Chapter 767. Jingjio understood what she meant after a moment of bewilderment. "How should I write it?" he asked instead of delving deeper into this topic. It was of course not a question about the writing techniques. Zhong Lizi explained, "There are 2 kinds of writing that are commonly used nowadays. One is the consciousness writing, which collects the fluctuations of your consciousness and then presents them in words. The problem with this method is that the reader's thoughts are out of control and some messy fragments will appear in the words. The serious writers who have won the literary prizes like this method, but the commercial writers seldom use it because it's too troublesome to modify it. Another reason is that the equipment for collecting consciousness is too expensive. What about the other method? Asked Jingjiao. Zhong Lizi took out a small object that looked like a finger glove from her room, saying, "The other method is to use the remote sensing pen." Having said that, she demonstrated it to him. She put the finger glove on her right forefinger, and then it started vibrating rapidly. A line of words appeared on the screen of the computer without any errors or omissions. "What's the difference between this method and using paper and pen?" asked Jingjiao. Zhong Lizi took off her gloves and put them by the computer, saying seriously, "It's faster and cheaper than using paper and pen." Jingjiao thought that these mortals didn't have to pay attention to the things he didn't have to, so he went back to his room with the computer in his arms. Zhong Lizi pulled back her gaze from the tightly shut door and walked into the kitchen to prepare the dinner. The tasteless but healthy nuggets tasted awful even though they were served with tea. She would have complained if it were under normal circumstances, but she was so distracted that she didn't notice how she had swallowed those nuggets. Everyone's first book is about themselves. The story he was writing in his room must be set in that beautiful world about the grudges and grudges of the upper class, and maybe the secret stories of the aristocratic clans. It might even be related to a young mistress in the priest clan. The girl with silvery hair thought that she would get a share of the money if the story became popular. She felt great about it. Perhaps it would be better if he was brought back to the upper class by his clan, but he couldn't bear to be separated from her, so he brought her back with him. Then, she thought, "I'm an ignorant girl who covets wealth and glory." Thinking of these things, she brushed off the residue of the nutrition block on her hand, took out a tea bag, and made a cup of tea. She pushed open the door of the study and walked in. "You'll definitely be a little rusty at the beginning. I'll accompany you for a few days, and you'll be able to get used to it." Zhong Lizi placed the teacup on the windowsill and turned to Jingjiao sitting on the floor, saying concernedly, "Don't worry. Have you finished writing?" Her voice grew louder and louder, until it finally became a question of incredulity. At the end of the 7th volume, he saw those warships. Jingjiao turned off the computer after writing this line of words. He looked at the silver-haired girl and said, "I'm not done yet, but that's it for now." Zhong Lizi had a bewildered expression on her face. She suddenly came back to her senses after a while, exclaiming, "You're such a liar. It must have been written in advance." But where did he put it before he wrote it? It definitely couldn't be the Academy's intranet. He didn't have a wristband, and it didn't seem like he had a chip implanted. Jingjiao didn't know what in advance meant, so he didn't pay any attention to her. "How do I publish it?" he asked. Zhong Lizi hadn't recovered from the shock yet, saying, "There's a forum on the Institute network. You can upload it every day after you've registered." Jingjiao knew what registration meant, saying, "I don't have an identification mark, so I can't register." Zhong Lizi pressed while covering her face with her hands. "What if you use mine?" Jingjiao uttered after some thought. Zhong Lizi picked up the computer and operated it for a while. Soon, she had uploaded 20,000 words. Seeing her focus on increasing the number of hits, Jingjiao asked, "Aren't you going to continue?" Staring at the light screen, Zhong Lizi wanted to see who the first comment was. 20,000 words a day is enough, she replied casually. Jingjiao thought he would have to wait here for 100 days. "Publish all of them," he said. Zhong Lizi lifted her head and glanced at him as if she were looking at an idiot. Then, she found this idiot was too good-looking. She lowered her head uncomfortably and said, "If I publish it all at once, it'll be buried in the forum. Nobody will pay attention to it." Jingjiao wondered what the reason was. "Nobody will read it once it's finished," Zhong Lizi explained patiently. "It's not finished," said Jingjiao. "This story has only just begun." Seeing his insistence, Zhong Lizi suggested, "Let's make a compromise. How about 30,000 a day?" 500,000, said Jingjiao. Zhong Lizi said, 50,000, 100,000 is fine. Deal? Looking at her outstretched hand in front of him and her eyes that were as innocent as a small animal's, Jingjiu reached out his right hand and clapped it gently when he thought of those guys on the Shinma Peak. Pointing to the computer, Zhong Lizi said, "Shall I read it first tonight?" Jingjiu nodded, thinking that he had to digest the knowledge of the number theory that night. Zhong Lizi returned to her bedroom happily after picking up the computer. The faint glow of the light screen leaked out from the crack of the bedroom door the whole night, and the sound of sobbing could be heard once in a while. The next morning, she walked out from her bedroom with the computer in her arms. Her silvery hair was messy, her eyes red, and her face haggard. It was evident that she hadn't slept the whole night. Jingjiu was reading the morning news while lying in the chair. Seeing her in such a state, he couldn't help but glance at her a few more times. "The writing is not bad," said Zhong Lizi in a casual manner after wiping her reddened nose with a tissue. Jingjiu uttered to express his bafflement, asking, "Only not bad?" Zhong Lizi sat by his side and said, "The story is interesting, but the emotion is not so intense, and the contradictions are not so intense. The key is the writing. I felt so sad when Lien Sanhua died, but I couldn't cry." Jingjiu thought to himself that she had cried a few times last night. What was the reason for that? Was it the spring rain that Lu Xi transformed into, or the fight between him and Nanchu? That young Master Li is so pitiful. Thinking of the lonely grave at the 3,000 nunnery and the song of the happy night, Zhong Lizi felt more and more sad. She couldn't help but burst into tears after a sleepless night. Jingjiu didn't say anything, nor did he do anything to comfort her. All he did was watch her cry in silence. It was pointless for her to cry alone. She gradually stopped crying and glanced at Jingjiu angrily. Then she picked up her backpack and went to the institute. Zhong Lizi truly thought that the novel titled The Path Toward Heaven was a good one, but she forgot that she had read it all in one go, so she didn't have to endure the pain of reading the latest chapters. The forum of the New Era Institute was quiet. The novel didn't cause any reaction, except for a few comments. And the comments were not about the content of the novel, but about the rumors related to the author. Zhong Lizi was not convinced, so she couldn't help but bring it up in class. She asked her classmates to read the novel and comment on it, and it would be best if they could give a few likes. A few days later, she heard the complaints of her classmates outside the classroom. She couldn't help but tell Jingjiu about it after she returned home. After the news was over, Jingjiu turned to Zhong Lizi and asked, "What did you just say?" "I'm giving you a suggestion on behalf of the readers. Your writing style is pretty good, accurate, and clean, but the plot is too far apart and the writing is too unorganized. As a result, I can't remember what happened in the beginning." Zhong Lizi continued after some thought. "There is another important problem. Jing Yang pretends to be nonchalant when he does things. It's too pretentious and it's annoying." Jingjiu thought that he was a nonchalant ferryman to begin with. How could he pretend to be pretentious? Life went on in a nonchalant manner. Time flowed like water. The novel posted on the New Era Institute's website went with the flow, not stirring up any ripples. Zhong Lizi had gradually lost her motivation, but Jingjiu didn't care about it all. He spent all his time and energy on studying. One day, he had finally finished reading all the textbooks on physics and mathematics on the Institute's website. He had basically mastered them according to his requirements. The more complicated physics and mathematics knowledge couldn't be found on the Institute's website. As for the books on the 3 bookshelves in the room, most of them were books on economics, finance, and accounting. It was true that Zhong Lizi's father was an economics professor. An economics professor committed suicide because of a fund scam. Jingjiu couldn't help but shake his head, thinking that the mortals were indeed a kind of interesting and pitiful existence, no matter in the universe or in Chaotian. By dusk, Zhong Lizi had received a week's worth of food and returned home in the faintly discernible twilight. Seeing Jingjiu watching TV while lying in the chair, she couldn't help but feel it odd, asking, "Do you also rest?" Jingjiu uttered and explained after some thought, I've finished reading them. You finished reading them? It's a 4-year course at the Institute, but you've finished reading them in a dozen days. Zhong Lizi didn't believe what he said. She turned on the computer on the tea table and demanded, "You should write your graduation thesis for me to read." "I don't want it," said Jing Jiao without taking his eyes off the TV screen. He didn't want it because he didn't need any proof. Of course, the main reason he didn't want it was because he was lazy. Zhong Lizi asked after some thought, "Do you want to do the exam papers? Otherwise, you won't be able to be sure that you have learned them." Jing Jiao, still staring at the TV screen, said casually, "I have." Zhong Lizi was startled. She turned on the question bank on the Institute's website and found that Jing Jiao had indeed done 7 sets of exam papers, and he got full marks for each set. It was exceedingly quiet in the room, save for the familiar voice of the newscaster. "Did you copy the answers?" Otherwise, how could you get so many full marks?" "I didn't get any other marks." Kneeling on the chair, Zhong Lizi looked down at Jing Jiao's face, her eyes full of awe and respect. In the next moment, the awe and respect in her eyes turned into sympathy and pity. It was said that the students would choose to input the knowledge directly during the elementary learning, so they didn't have to memorize it. He was such a genius, but he had to learn by himself. It was evident that he was despised by his clan, and he might have been persecuted. As a result, he fled to the underworld. Zhong Lizi seemed to have witnessed an exciting story. The young genius would take back what belonged to him in the end. Zhong Lizi was the light that the young genius met at the lowest point of his life, a companion, or even a partner. "Do you want to go to school?" Staring into Jing Jiao's eyes, Zhong Lizi said, "You shouldn't waste your time on the elementary knowledge because of your talent. All the knowledge you should learn is in the internal database of the library of the Institute." Jing Jiao knew that she was at the New Era Institute, which was similar to Yamatai compared to other institutes. "Okay," he said. Zhong Lizi couldn't help but cough out of excitement, as if she had witnessed a legendary scene. Jing Jiao shot her a glance. She waved her hand to indicate that she was all right and turned around to go back to the bedroom. She didn't find that Jing Jiao had followed her into the bedroom. Like what he had done a few days ago, Jing Jiao turned into a ghost. He stood in a corner of the bedroom in silence, looking at Zhong Lizi on the bed. With her back to the door, she wrapped her head in the quilt and coughed softly. It seemed that she didn't want to disturb Jing Jiao, who should be in the living room. The bed quivered along with her coughing, and her silvery hair outside the quilt quivered as well. She looked quite pitiful. Chapter 768. This bedroom was much larger than the study room, but it had no window. The window was fake, so the starry sky outside and the blue sky and white clouds during the day were fake as well. Like the cell in the sword jail, the snowland and the icy peak were also fake. They were used to relieve the snow girl's boredom. Everybody would be imprisoned by various things for various reasons. The snow girl was imprisoned in Chaotian, and this girl with silvery hair was imprisoned by her illness. The thermostat in the bedroom was not very good either. Zhong Lizi groaned in a low voice, feeling extremely uncomfortable. She broke out in cold sweat a few times, wetting the upper edge of the bedding and her silvery hair. Jing Jiao looked at her in silence and waved his hand to let her fall into a deep sleep. The coughing in the room disappeared, and so did the trembling of the bed and the groaning. Jing Jiao came to the head of the bed and looked at the face of the girl with silvery hair. Even though she was asleep, her eyebrows were furrowed, and her face was as pale as a piece of paper. 2 bright sword lights came out in the deep end of his eyes. His gaze swept over her body like a sword, and he could see clearly the condition of her body through the bedding and clothes. He had found something wrong with the body of this girl with silvery hair the first night he came to this room. Now that he had a closer look, he found out that it was a serious problem. Her body was much weaker than it looked, and there were a few traces of frosted glass in her lungs. But the real problem was in her blood. The blood flowing along the blood vessels had an ominous energy. His vision became sharper, allowing him to see even more subtle images and the cells that were constantly swimming around. According to what he had learned in the last few days, the ratio of the blood cells was not right, and there were too many white blood cells. This was a serious case of leukemia. If she hadn't been suppressed by the medicine, she would have died a long time ago. Jingjiu could completely cure this disease, but it would be troublesome and it would take a long time. As such, all he did was send a sword into the girl's body to stabilize her condition for the time being. The next day was also a rest day. Zhong Lizi felt quite energetic after she got up. She cooked a pot of rice porridge and then led Jingjiu to the street to run errands. The latter was even rarer than cooking for herself. The two of them walked on the street wearing the hooded sweatshirts over their heads. At noon, the streets were still so deserted. The sun, which was extremely rare in the underground world, swept past the corner of the sky, catching a glimpse of it. The countless people living in this block and similar blocks would usually stay at home and rarely go out. Anyway, he wouldn't be able to bask in the sun when he went out. The deeper they went, the quieter the street became. Even the sound of children being beaten and scolded could not be heard from inside the building. Many of the street lamps here had been broken, and the light was even dimmer. The face in the hat was dark too. Jingjiu touched the sportswear and felt very satisfied. He even liked it a little. This kind of clothes was very convenient, and the zipper design was even more convenient. The most convenient part was the hat at the back of the clothes, which could perfectly cover the perfect face, and there was no need to wear a conical hat. There was a very inconspicuous door on the street in front of him. It was about the width of a person and a half. The rusty shutter door was much sturdier than it looked, and there were still traces of iron rods on it. Zhong Lizi led Jingjiu to the door and knocked lightly on the roller shutter door, calling in a low voice, "Master Dan, it's me." Along with the faint buzzing sound of the motor, the roller shutter door was opened. The two of them walked in. In the dim environment, the stable light source was particularly eye-catching. A middle-aged man in a coarse cloth coat with a magnifying glass sat behind the table, staring at the object on the light source and doing something. "What do you want to do?" he asked without lifting his head. Zhong Lizi took off the hat and came before the table, saying, "We want to make a bracelet." The middle-aged man, called Master Dan, lifted his head and took off the magnifying glass on his head. He looked at Jingjiu behind her, and it seemed that he was not satisfied that Jingjiu didn't want to show his face. 30,000 credits, or 2 gold coins, he said casually. The price was indeed very high, but it was quite cheap for the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way who had no identification marks and could hardly move around. Zhong Lizi didn't know the situation on the black market lately, and she didn't care much about it. It was not her money anyway. She turned to Jingjiu. "Wait for me," said Jingjiu. Having said that, Jingjiu opened the roller shutter door and walked back to the street. To Master Dan's and Zhong Lizi's surprise, Jingjiu came back soon after. He placed 2 brand new and well-preserved gold coins on the table. Seeing the 2 gold coins, the corners of Master Dan's eyes twitched uncontrollably. He turned around and placed a stool in front of Jingjiu, saying, "Please sit down." He had mentioned 2 gold coins casually. He didn't expect Jingjiu to take out so many gold coins. 2 gold coins were almost the same as 30,000 credits, but their meanings were completely different. The only people who would use the gold coins as currency were the important figures in the black market, save for those in the upper echelons. Jingjiu had gotten used to others' awe and respect, so he sat on the stool calmly. Zhong Lizi shot him a glance. Master Dan had already prepared himself. He took out a box from a hidden compartment in the drawer and took out an iris lens gingerly. "This is brand new," he explained. Jingjiu didn't believe what Master Dan said. He took the iris lens and pretended to put it into his eye, but he actually crushed it into powder. As Master Dan was collecting the information of the iris lens, he was shocked by the face under the lamp again, his hands almost trembling. It took half an hour to make the identification mark. Jingjiu thought it was too long. The Audiobook sect didn't bother to make the sword board. They simply asked the disciples to put a sword will into it, and there would be no problem. Moreover, it was quite troublesome to make the identification mark by matching the bracelet with the pupil. Jingjiu was not used to the bracelet. The bracelet should be made of a high molecular composite material, which was highly resistant to high-temperature corrosion and extremely light. Jingjiu still didn't like it. He didn't like anything on his body, including any accessories. The clean heart bell given to him by Sensei had been tied around Ada's neck. What if he has no hands? Jingjiu asked suddenly. Zhong said, some people choose to make it into a necklace, but most people choose to implant it because they find it troublesome. I heard that the distant ancient civilization used this method. What about the blind man? Asked Jingjiu. Zhong wondered if Jingjiu had been influenced by the trend on the forum when he visited the Institute network recently. She said indignantly, there must be another way. It was even darker in the deep end of the street. Many shady businesses could be found here, like the shop of Master Dan, in addition to the black market meat trading market and the private internet cafes banned by the Federation. This kind of internet cafes could often break through the layers of blockades and access all the contents of the Institute network, and even the top network, so they were quite popular among the young people. This kind of internet cafes had another name, the gaming hall. Those who could run the gaming hall in the underground neighborhood must be important figures in the black market. The owner of this gaming hall was no exception. As far as he was concerned, the businesses here were merely camouflage and a transfer station for the black money. Who can explain to me what is going on here? The owner of the gaming hall pointed to the open safe behind him and looked at a dozen underworld men in front of him, his eyes seemingly ablaze with fire that could erupt at any moment. Looking at the gold coins and crystal cards in the safe, those underworld men swallowed hard. Big boss, isn't the money all here? One of them asked bravely. 2 gold coins are missing. The owner of the gaming hall was very tall and fat. He exuded an intimidating aura as he stood there expressionlessly. No, 3 gold coins are missing, including the one we lost a few days ago. The 3 gold coins were indeed a lot of money, enough to keep the most beautiful girl next door for 3 months. However, there were so many gold coins in the safe. Why was the big boss so angry? Money is not a problem. No, money is a problem. It's because these are the gold coins that even I can't use. But they're gone now, and they're gone without a trace. The owner of the gaming hall suddenly lost his temper, yelling while spitting saliva, someone has been here the whole time. How did that thief steal it? Is it a damn ghost? A subordinate who was good at stealing had been studying the safe. After a while, he said, Big boss, your safe is a retro-mechanical safe, so it's impossible to open it by other means. There's only one explanation. Someone knows your password. The owner of the gaming hall turned around and slapped him to the ground, saying, even my wife doesn't know the password. Who else would know it? Jingjiu didn't need to know the password to open the safe. It was because his hand was the sharpest sword in the world, and it was also the key to open all the locks, just like his face. Hold it in for a while. Zhong thought he was the illegitimate son of a clan above, so he must have brought a great deal of money with him when he fled to this world. As such, she didn't suspect the origin of those gold coins. They came to the end of the street and saw a cliff whose top couldn't be seen. There was a flight of stairs in the middle of the cliff and a silvery line in the distance, which might be an escalator. Follow me. Zhong took a deep breath, her silvery hair tousling slightly. Her body became much lighter, and her feet left the ground slowly. This was the first time Jingjiu had seen someone in this world use the cultivation state, aside from the matches on TV. He was curious about it. Zhong tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and drifted up the stairs like a patch of cloud. Soon, she was 100 feet away. She suddenly thought that Jingjiu was still behind her, feeling worried. She turned around and found that she had thought too much. He came from the upper world, so it was impossible for him not to know the cultivation state. Jingjiu walked up the mountain path with his hands folded behind his back. He arrived by her side effortlessly. You're acting like an old man. Zhong mocked him before she continued drifting toward the top of the cliff. It didn't take long for the two of them to arrive at the top of the cliff. The sunlight here was much brighter than in the underground world, and they could see some blue sky and white clouds. The blue sky and white clouds were in a semi-transparent state. If someone from Chaotian came here, he would feel uncomfortable and might even feel dizzy. While thinking of all this, Jingjiu gazed at the deep end of the blue sky and white clouds, and he could vaguely see the shadow of a battleship. There was a large patch of grassland on the cliff, and many buildings could be seen in the distance. They must be the New Era Institute. Chapter 769. Zhong Lizi noticed that Jingjiu's countenance was the same as usual, and his breathing was the same. She couldn't help but feel envious, asking, "What state are you in?" The cultivation states in this world were divided into a few major states. Most of the people at the New Era Institute were in the initial state, or the fire-observing state. The fire-observing state was divided into 12 levels. Jingjiu had learned all this from the computer and the books. Looking at the intermittent battleship, he thought it was better to keep a low profile. "Level 11?" he asked. Zhong Lizi said, while looking at him enviously, "The professors at the New Era Institute are about level 10, to say nothing of the students. I think you're a genius no matter where you are." Jingjiu thought this was a fact that couldn't be denied. By no matter where, she meant the underground neighborhood, the New Era Institute, and above. What Jingjiu was thinking about was the universe and Chaotian. After entering the New Era Institute, Zhong Lizi led him to the administration office and applied for the qualification to sit in on the class as a relative. Jingjiu reached out his wristband to register his identity. Then he received the certificate of sitting in on the class and the most important library card. With the library card, he could go to the library and access the internal database to get the teaching materials and works he wanted to learn. The bell rang in a building in the distance. Zhong Lizi led him to the front door of the library and told him a few things to pay attention to, and then went to class in a hurry. She stopped short after taking 2 steps and turned around as if she had thought of something, saying, "Don't wander around. I'll take you to the canteen for lunch." She ran a bit fast, stopped a bit fast, and turned around a bit fast. Her silvery hair tousled in the air. They looked like the rotating stars in the universe. The library of the New Era Institute was much smaller than Jingjiu had imagined, at least many times smaller than the library building on Shirua Peak. Soon, he realized the reason. The computers and the reading terminals in the library could store many books, which seemed to be more advanced than those in Chaotian. However, the electronic books in the library could only display the 3-dimensional pictures, but couldn't record the sword wills, pen wills, and intentions of the authors. As Jingjiu thought of this, he took out his library card and took out a reading terminal. He found a quiet and remote reading room and sat down. He had been scanned 5 times since he entered the library, came to the reading terminal, and entered the reading room. It was very difficult to avoid those scans. If he didn't want to be scanned, he could only break through the wall. The real problem was that the buildings here were too orderly. People lived in fixed areas according to fixed routes. There were no mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas here. There were even very few trees and rocks. What would he play? Just as he had thought in the laboratory when he first came to this world. Was he going to become a wastebasket? The reading terminal was also a computer, but it was connected to the database in the library of the New Era Institute, so the data could be retrieved at any time. Countless rays of light emerged from the terminal and overlapped with each other to form a light screen. It emitted a gentle light that was not harmful to the eyes, forming patterns and words. Jingjiu's fingers moved quickly on the terminal, leaving behind countless afterimages. No one knew what he was pressing. The patterns and characters on the screen changed at an unimaginable speed. If someone stared at the screen in the reading room at this time, they would only see ribbons of light. Even those cultivators with high cultivation could not see the contents. The data was constantly changing, and the images were connected into rays of light. In a very short period of time, he had finished reading hundreds of books and journals. Still, he felt it was too slow. It was because many of the contents in the books and journals were repetitive, and most of them were useless information. According to the self-introduction of the library, There were 38 million books in the database here, which was more than 10,000 terabytes of data. T meant trillion terabytes, which he had learned before. How long would it take for him to read all the data in the library at this rate? Jingjiao spread out his sword discernment to make sure that nobody was paying attention to this place and that the wave of scanning was still ahead. He reached out his finger and tapped on the window on the door of the reading room. A sword came out from his finger and cast a layer of vague energy on the window. If someone looked in from the outside, they would only see that Jingjiao was recording something on the light screen. The sword will spread out after touching the glass of the window, forming a sword formation in a few seconds, isolating the outside world except for an opening for the high-speed optical cable to transmit data. Having done all this, Jingjiao cut off the connection between the optical cable and the reading terminal, and then held it in his hand. If Zhao Leiyu were here, she would have noticed a slight change in Jingjiao's hand. Jingjiao started reading the data transmitted from the optical cable with his eyes closed. It was not accurate to use the word reading. It was more accurate to use the word absorbing. It was also inaccurate to use the word transmitting. It was more accurate to use the word flooding. An incalculable amount of data flowed into his body like a tide. Even though his consciousness was as deep as the sea, there were still some ripples in it. The waves were white, and his face turned a bit paler. What's going on? Seeing the warning signal displayed in the database, the teachers of the library of the New Era Institute eyed each other in bewilderment. In the next moment, the doors of all the reading rooms in the library were opened. The students came out from the reading rooms in bewilderment, asking why the terminals had malfunctioned. The lights in the hall didn't flicker, and no electric sparks were generated, but an eerie and tense atmosphere had gradually filled the air. It was unclear which information node couldn't withstand the impact of the large amount of data and was disconnected. If the database had a soul, it would have felt relieved inwardly. The door of a reading room was opened without any wind. It was unclear who had left. The data optical cable dropped to the ground like a dead snake, devoid of any energy. Jingjiao walked out of the library and looked up at the sky while standing on the stone steps. Looking at the indistinct figures of the battleships behind the blue sky and white clouds, a hint of regret showing in the deep end of his eyes. It was an interesting thing to absorb knowledge, especially the knowledge that he had never encountered before. Back when he had just arrived in Aoyama, he was taken by his big brother to Shirua Peak to read the books for a few years, and he had read all the books and records in Aoyama. Since then, he had rarely felt as happy as he did today. It was because it was so interesting that he was immersed in it, absorbing the information at an increasingly faster rate. The capacity of the data optical cable could still hold on, but the database was being read so much that the computing core couldn't hold on any longer. He thought he should leave the library for safety reasons, but he decided to stay where he was when he remembered that Zone Lizzie said she would have lunch with him. It didn't take long before Zone Lizzie ran over from the teaching building and came to the foot of the stone steps. "I heard something happened in the library," she said after catching her breath while holding her knees. Jingjiao didn't understand why she had to run around when she had such a serious blood disease. "I don't know," he said calmly. The canteen of the New Era Institute was not far from the library. Zone Lizzie found he really didn't know anything about the library after she told him about it. Feeling bored, she suddenly halted her steps and asked Jingjiao, "Would you like to meet my classmates? If they knew you were the true path." Jingjiao didn't wait for her to finish her sentence, refusing directly, "No." Zone Lizzie felt even more bored, saying, "Fine." The two of them walked into the canteen. Many people looked in their direction. Jingjiao covered his head with the cap of the tracksuit, so his silvery hair attracted everyone's attention. Many people at the New Era Institute had learned that she had written a novel over the last few days, and they also knew what had happened to her family. Some of the gazes contained surprise, sympathy, mockery, and contempt. All the students knew was that her parents had died, and she had failed the second gene modification. It seemed that she had some kind of disease, but nobody could find out about it due to the privacy rules. The reason they were surprised was that she had never come to the canteen to eat. I thought she was an otherworldly princess who looked down on the food of mortals like us. It turns out that she is just poor. There was a table in the distance with 4 girls sitting around it. A girl said this mockingly while looking in this direction. The other 3 girls laughed out loud. Another girl remarked scornfully, "I thought she was going to be a priest when I saw her cold and aloof appearance." Though these discussions were not loud, Zone Lizzie couldn't hear them, but she knew what had happened from the laughter and the undisguised gazes. She led Jingjiu to a corner and sat down without giving any response. Jingjiu had heard all the discussions clearly, but he didn't pay any attention to them. Zone Lizzie asked him to sit down, and she went to get the food. Seeing this, the crowd felt even more curious, wondering who the guy with the cap covering his face was. Why did he let Zone Lizzie do all this for him? The food on the plate was not the cheapest nutrition cube, but the real vegetables and fried steak. Jingjiu didn't care what he ate, and it didn't matter whether he ate it or not. Thinking of her kindness, he nodded to express his gratitude. It was then that a young girl came to the front of the table after some hesitation. She looked at Zone Lizzie, hesitating to say something. Zone Lizzie lifted her head and asked, "What's the matter?" The young girl said shamefully with tears in her eyes, "Lizzie, I'm sorry. I told the class about your childhood, but I didn't expect those people to hear it." Zone Lizzie said with a smile, "Silly girl, do you think I'll blame you?" Hearing this, the young girl felt relieved. She left after saying sorry while covering her chest with her hand. Zone Lizzie took off the hair tie on her wrist and tied up her silvery hair, asking, "Lu Shuiqian, my classmate from the elementary school and the middle school, what do you think?" "She's lying," said Jingjiu. "You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.